Hey everyone, and welcome to the best of the week number 3. Almost 4 hours worth of horror stories. We have some stuff ranging from the dark web to security cameras and much, much more. I do not place these stories in any specific order, so there are a ton of really awesome stories to be found throughout. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I am currently uploading 2 horror stories every single day. I am aiming to find the best ones possible. I am posting at 6 p.m. Central and 10 p.m. Central. Again, every single day. I'm putting in more work into this channel right now than I ever have in the past. And I'm really enjoying it, actually. I'm having a lot of fun creating content. I feel like we're in a position where there's room for a lot of growth, and it has me very, very motivated. It reminds me of the early days, and I'm just very appreciative for the people that are taking this journey with me. Again, thank you all for the support. It means the world. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. During my first year of college, I was introduced to the Tor browser by my new roommate, Ricky. Those of you who have been around the internet for long enough know Tor is a browser engine used to help you access the dark web, to which we frequently did. For a barely 20-year-old dude experiencing his first moments of living away from home, being handed a way to access nearly whatever I wanted just from the press of a few keys, felt like being handed absolute freedom. Well, we mostly just used it for accessing pirated games and films, or maybe visiting a band website. There were times I found myself on the more twisted side of it all. I've honestly seen some pretty messed up stuff that I really didn't want or need to see, other than to satisfy my morbid curiosity of it. Would be possible to even reach those places. Well, I mostly regret these deeper dives into the dark web. One such dive might have very well saved my life. It was about 2 a.m. on a Friday during the end of my 3rd year of college, and Ricky had been spending the night at a cousin's house, leaving me to myself. I had been scrolling through the web, going through various shady movie sites and running games I didn't technically own, when I got a strange pop-up ad. One-time auction, limited items. One of a kind. Get now or never again. Don't miss out on these items. It read in a flashing red and green Comic Sans font. Now, I've gone to a few of these dark web auctions. Even participated in a few of impulse bidding on things that triggered something in my dumb college dude brain. This ranged from things like overly engraved gold handguns you would see Tony Montana strapping, to pounds of the finest weed grown in the purest soils of Jamaica, just to give me that little adrenaline rush of, dude, what if I actually get it? Granted, I only ever bid 10, maybe 20 bucks tops, knowing actually winning any of it would probably land me behind bars. I wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and would have been busted within minutes of receiving the package. This one would be different, however. I decided I'd check out the auction and check the link before browsing through the bids. At first, it wasn't anything serious, mostly firearms and drugs, typical black web catalog. As I moved down the list, the items got more extreme, much more extreme. The list started with simple low-caliber handguns you could get at Walmart in some states, but quickly changed to sniper rifles and LMGs fit for military elites, till it was eventually being offered small nuclear explosives claiming to have enough power to level small towns to ash and brimstone. Super strong pot and funny mushrooms quickly turned to advertisements for pounds of Colombian cocaine, to 10-pound boxes of fentanyl pills. Shadiest of all were what I assume are experimental drugs. Black and yellow sludge-like substances held in test tubes that didn't even have real names. Just things like XT exclamation exclamation parenthesis 1 slash and B8 plus star RVV1 slash. Judging by the descriptions, these things fry your brain considering the people selling it explain the effects mostly through incoherency. Barely understandable sentences implying they've been indulging on their own supply. I remember one going along the lines of, fun green bubbles. When super cool if eaten, it's like green bubble, blue green bubbles. They fly up, eat up, fly down with the green bubbles. I might be paraphrasing on that, but trust me, it wouldn't have made any sense than if I did get it spot on. Eventually I reached what I took to be the hitman and murderer catalog. Poison brews of resin and cyanide, claiming to have 0 scent or taste. Soundproof sneakers, weapon silencers, fake aliases, passports. People were even selling codes that were apparently instructions on how to get to areas in your location where bodies are most often hidden and never found. There were other codes that were labeled as how-to instructional tapes made by professionals on how to get away with various types of murder to even murders. If you didn't want to do the work yourself, you could buy the phone number to a top-class hitman near you who will make sure your job is done effectively. Things only got worse when I scrolled to the next page to see photos of people, some even children, with their names listed underneath. They were advertising human trafficking and given each of their product a small biography of sorts, as if they were stat cards. It listed everything from address to allergies, strengths, weaknesses, even down to the daily routine. Now I've seen these kinds of black room type things and was well aware of how sick people can be on the dark web, but seeing it never got any less unsettling, especially reading some of the things these bidders wanted to do with the product once they got their hands on them. This unsettlement quickly turned to unimaginable, agonizing fear as I scrolled down to see my own portrait, one taken on my first day of college. I began to panic as I read off my card. Whoever these people were, they knew my name, age, race, height, weight, even down to my small birthmark behind my ear. Not only that, but they seemed to have known my whole life history from birth. My panic only grew wider as I saw there were already 4 bidders, the highest of which bidding almost 15 grand. The sickest part was these bidders left comments, things like, "He'd fit well with my collection. I can't wait to have his body. I wish to taste his skin," along with a slew of horrible, deranged stuff they wanted to do with me that I really don't want to repeat. I fell back and began to hyperventilate. It felt like my heart was going to give out and my brain was going to explode thinking of all the horrible things that may happen to me at the hands of these sick, twisted people who looked to take ownership of my life. Most of the rest of the night was a blur. I remember bidding 20k off the bat to top the list, then periodically bidding I think another 3, what felt like 30 minutes till I reached almost 40k. After that, I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember was waking up curled into a ball under my desk in a puddle of cold sweat. It was still dark out, so the flashing lights coming from my monitor were all too noticeable. I could feel myself shaking in fear as I slowly crawled out from under the desk before slowly looking at my screen and seeing in large, red Comic Sans, "Congratulations, you win. Please list where you'd like to send your prize. We will send an agent to deliver your package." I felt an overwhelming amount of relief wash over my body seeing I had just bought myself. Sure, I ended up putting myself in near debt before I've even finished school, but I'm alive and free. Knowing those vile fucks wouldn't be able to live out their fantasies was enough for me to forget about any possible money problems. I think I even started laughing like a madman for a second as I entered. "Leave them be. I bought them their freedom so they don't suffer, hoping that it'd be enough explanation, and thankfully, it was, as I was answered rather quickly with another message. Understood. Your product will be removed from all auctions and marked as sold. Thank you for your purchase, Evan. Reading that caused me to nearly collapse, as if all the stress and tension built up drained from my body, only to quickly return as I reread the message. They know I just bid on myself. They were still watching. The next couple months were a living hell of paranoia and anxiety. I tried to explain what I could to Ricky, and he did his best to help calm me down, but it was fruitless. Eventually, though, after enough time, I was able to move on from it. More so, I think my mind forced me to block it out. But it's all come back now thanks to an email I had just received from Ricky almost 8 years after that night. Please help. I don't have the money to go up against the highest bidder. I responded as quickly as possible, asking for him to send me his PayPal or something. That was 2 days ago. I haven't gotten a response. I think he lost the auction. I'm writing this at my neighbor's house where we're currently waiting for the police. I suppose I'll tell them the same thing I told Jack when I came banging on his door this morning. I can't exactly tell them the truth. They wouldn't believe a word of it, and I can't say I'd blame them. I'm not sure why I'm even telling you, except you may be the only people who would believe me, and I have to tell someone or I think I'll lose my damn mind. For context, my house sits on a good amount of land that sits next to a large open field to the left of it. There's a few acres of trees beyond the field, a small forest as my wife likes to say. Our closest neighbor Jack lives about 1.5 miles down the road, so we pretty much have the place all to ourselves. Our own little pocket of paradise, beautiful and safe. Well, that's how I used to think of it. Now I don't feel safe here. Not at all. It's tainted to me now and I don't know what to do. I've never seen anything like this before. If anyone reading this has ever been in a similar situation, or possibly knows what it could be, and most importantly, what I can do, please reach out. Last spring, Michelle, my wife, thought it would be a good idea to get one of those doorbell cameras. We'd had some things go missing as well as some minor destruction on our property. Nothing too serious, just a few broken flower pots and some missing lawn ornaments. I tried to tell her it was probably some teenagers from town, just finding something exciting to do, but she wouldn't hear it. She didn't care about the flower pots or lawn ornaments that much, but she didn't want the situation to escalate into a home invasion. I thought that was a little dramatic, but I knew when to keep my mouth shut. So we bought the camera and installed it the same day, right up by our porch lights so that we could get a view of the front door and as much of the front of our property in the shot as possible. After 2 days, we finally solved the mystery of the missing lawn decor. You probably already figured it out. If you guessed 2 raccoons, you'd be dead on. It was kinda hilarious watching them scooping up my wife's solar garden lights and carrying them off on 2 legs. Watching them run away with those bright blue bulbs in their hands like 2 little burglars was pretty funny. They even looked the part with those masks. Even Michelle couldn't keep a straight face. I wondered what they were doing with all the stolen goods. Maybe sprucing up their digs out in the forest. Michelle started putting out bowls of cat kibble, and amazingly the thievery stopped. We still kept the camera up, though. Turns out it would come in handy. Michelle has been out of town for work for the last 4 days. She was supposed to be home last night, about around dinner, but called me to tell me the plane had been delayed, and she wouldn't be home until 4 a.m. or later. I told her I loved her, and I'd see her when she came home. And that was that. It was an average night, nothing out of the ordinary. I straightened up the house so she wouldn't come home to a disaster. I made some soup for dinner and fed the cat. After, me and Mona curled up on the couch together, me watching TV while she purred on my chest. I went to sleep around 2 a.m. I'd only slept a little over an hour before I was woken up by an alert on my phone, a notification for my security camera. Now, it wasn't unusual to get an alert, especially late at night. It was always some little critter, a fox or raccoon, but I grabbed my phone off my nightstand to check anyway. It was well after 2, and my immediate thought was that Michelle had gotten home earlier than she thought she would. I'd laid there listening for the sound of Michelle letting herself in, but it never came. Only silence. I groaned, figuring she'd forgotten her keys. Wouldn't be the first time. She was notorious for leaving them behind. Probably forgot them at the hotel or airport. I didn't jump right up to check though, as I still hadn't heard her knock. So I opened the app and pulled up the live feed. Michelle was standing in the front porch, just staring at the door. I sat up about to go let her in when something stopped me. It was her face. She was smiling. Not just any smile, but one that I'd never seen before. A weird, thin-lipped grin that stretched the width of her face, like someone trying to show off all of their teeth. She stayed that way for a long moment, like a creepy mannequin. After a minute, her lips slowly puckered out into the pout, as though she were an upset toddler. She held that expression for a minute, then let her lips drop downwards, and a deep-set frown etched across her forehead. I sat there in bed staring at my wife, practicing different facial expressions as if they were brand new at such a concept. It was bizarre and a little unsettling. She continued to go through each movement, seeming to take her time with each one. Smile, pout, frown, repeat. After watching her for nearly 15 minutes, I finally recovered from my shock and confusion and pressed the intercom. "Babe, what on earth are you doing?" I said. Her head snapped towards the camera, looking up at it with wide eyes. It was as if she had forgotten the camera was even there. Her mouth was partially hanging open on one side, caught between a smile and a frown. She didn't answer me, only continued to stare, her face frozen in that disturbing look. I waited for a long moment, unsure how to proceed. The longer I watched her, the more I realized just how strange she looked. I didn't notice at first, being half asleep, but now I was wide awake. It was so obvious that I wondered how I could have not noticed immediately. For starters, she seemed much taller. The top of her head came to just over the little rod we used to hang our different holiday flags. The one I have to stand on my tiptoes to be able to reach. That wasn't the only odd thing about her. Her arms were much too long, hanging down past her knees. Even her face was different. It resembled her, enough that it wasn't instantly noticeable, but when I really looked, I could see that her face seemed more narrow, as if it had been stretched from the top of her head to her jaw, and the skin looked too tight, as if it were 2 sizes too small, the bones underneath pushing hard against the flesh. I was beginning to panic at that point. I didn't know if she'd been in some horrible accident or what, but I knew something was very wrong with her. "Honey, are you hurt?" I asked, my voice shaking. In response to my question, Michelle stamped her foot down on the porch hard, shaking her head. Before I could say anything else, she reached out and took hold of the doorknob and jiggled it fiercely. I was instantly filled with dread at the mere thought of her getting in. "I'm not letting you inside," I said quickly. I could hear her jiggling the knob frantically, her face still staring up at the camera. She finally let go after a few minutes and made a sound almost like laughing. The sound of it made my skin crawl. "I'm home," she said. Her voice, like her face, was similar but not a complete match. It went from nasally to almost baby-like. "I'm home. Open the door." I almost closed the app and called 911 right then and there, but I'll admit, I was afraid my wife was having some sort of medical emergency. "Maybe I should call for help," I said. She shook her head again, her long hair whipping from side to side. Then something happened, and that image will stick with me for the rest of my life. Michelle, or the thing that was desperately trying to be her, seemed to stretch right in front of my eyes. Her torso thinned out and grew so that her head slid against the ceiling. Its skin looked so tight that I could actually hear it pulling, wobbling, and rubber-like. It had obvious trouble staying on 2 feet, but it managed. It tried to close its mouth, but it couldn't do it completely, and its jaw just sort of hung there against its chest. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, fear overwhelming me. The moment the words left my mouth, her face twisted in a look of pure hatred. It was like I could feel it radiating through the screen. I'd never seen such hate and rage in my life, certainly not on my wife's face. Quick as a flash, she dropped down onto the porch and crawled down the steps and onto the lawn. I watched in horror as she crawled towards the field, her long arms bent at sickening angles. She reached the edge of the field and disappeared in the tall grass. I sat watching the screen, my heart racing. I was too afraid to look away even for a moment. After an hour without seeing her again, I finally felt safe enough to set the phone down and try to sleep. I thought about calling my wife, but part of me was too scared I'd hear the poor imitation on the other end. I fell into a restless sleep sometime later. I didn't sleep long before my phone woke me up again. Another notification. I pulled up the app and held my breath, terrified at what I'd see. When the feed came up, I knew right away that I was looking at my wife. Relief flooded my body. She was standing on the porch, her suitcase at her feet, and she rummaged through her purse, probably searching for her keys. "Lost your keys again?" I said, pressing the intercom. She jumped at the sound of my voice, almost dropping her purse. "You're up," she said, smiling. "Looks like I have lost my keys. Mind letting me in?" she said, batting her eyes up at the camera. I couldn't help but smile. She always had a way of making me feel completely at ease, even after witnessing a nightmare just hours prior. "I suppose I wouldn't be a very good husband if I let you sleep on the porch all night," I teased. She grinned up at me, and I told her to hang on. I sat up and slipped on my slippers, and got to my feet. That's when I caught some movement on the screen. Far off in the field, a head rose up from the grass, standing tall on a neck much too long to come from anything human. A whimper escaped my lips, and I nearly dropped my phone. I was glued to the floor, unable to look away from that thing watching my house. The head bobbed slightly, then the body rose up towards to meet the head, like a slinky sliding back in position. It stood in the field watching. Then, to my terror, it began shuffling quickly towards the house on jerky legs. I couldn't help but scream. It was coming for my wife, and it was coming fast, even with its unstable gait. I ran down the hall, dropping my phone in the process, skipping steps as I raced down them. I lost my footing when I hit the bottom and skipped down across the front hall, colliding into the front door. I was screaming incoherently, fumbling with the locks. I could hear my wife's concerned voice asking me what was wrong. Then, just as I was working to flip the deadbolt, I heard her scream, this time in pure fear. I finally managed to flip the deadbolt and rip the door open, taking a handful of her jacket and yanking her inside, locking the door behind her. I leaned against the door, panting hard. I heard a muffled thump on the porch, but then it was quiet. My wife was scared, pale, and nearly in tears. She refused to talk about what she'd seen and didn't want to see the footage of the thing on our porch. I let her get some sleep, assuring her that the house was secure. I stayed up, checking the windows and the live feed. I watched the field for any sign of that thing, but it seemed like it was gone. Soon after, Michelle went to sleep. I decided to look at the video to see if I could tell where it went off to. I was scared to see it again. Maybe that's why I watched. I pulled up the video and watched the thing shambling across the field towards my house, its long arms outstretched, and a look of longing on its face. Its smile was terrible the closer it got. I saw my wife on the screen growing worried as she heard me screaming through the house, totally unaware of the danger she was in, of the thing that was just mere feet behind her. I could barely make it through the entire video, watching it get closer and closer. Just as it reached the porch, I could hear myself trying to unlock the door. But seconds before I pulled it open, those long arms reached out, gripping my wife by her shoulders and ripping her backwards off the porch. My wife able to scream only once. I didn't see what it did with her, but I did see it step up onto the porch, positioning itself in front of the door, its limbs adjusting to a more human appearance. Just before my hand shot out to pull it inside, that thing grinned up at the camera, its lips outstretched impossibly wide. For a moment, I almost didn't believe it. It was as if my brain wouldn't allow it. But as I stood in the hallway, attempting to process what I'd seen and what that meant, I heard the unmistakable sound of something shuffling up behind me. I ran then. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to see what I knew I would see. Something eerily similar to my wife, with gangly limbs and skin stretched taut over sharp bones. I knew if I looked back, my mind would snap and I'd never recover. I ran faster than I ever have, tearing off out of the house and down the road, too terrified to look back even once. Sure, I'd see those long arms desperately reaching for me. I made it to my neighbor's house and pounded on the door. I told him that there was an intruder. I didn't know what else to say. He'd never believe the truth. We went back to my house armed with Jack's rifle, but of course the house was empty. We couldn't find Michelle either. All we found were what looked like drag marks through the lawn, running right through the field. I didn't have to look at the video to know what made those tracks. We searched the field and the woods, but didn't find too much other than some strands of hair that looked an awful lot like Michelle's. The hair was high up on the branch in a tree that would be extremely difficult to climb. Jack said it must have been a bird that had done it. Flew the hair up there for nesting material. I guess he didn't see the blood splatter along the trunk. We eventually went back to Jack's place and called the police. Jack thought it best. I agreed, but I know it won't make much of a difference. Michelle is long gone by now. I just hope she didn't suffer. The guilt I feel for not saving her, for not knowing that thing wasn't my wife, is so profound it aches to breathe. I deleted the videos. I couldn't bear to watch them again. I think my mind would have broke completely if I had. The police are here, finally done with their search of the woods. I guess I'll have to go through the motions. It's not like I have any other choice. Not unless I want to spend the rest of my days in a padded room. Although considering the alternative, it's not a bad idea. If you have any experience with this or have any clue what I should do if it comes back, please let me know. I have a strong suspicion that it will be back, and God knows who it'll look like then. Because Jack's been acting a bit jittery ever since we came back from the woods, and it may just be my imagination, brought on by stress and grief, but Jack's skin seems to be stretched a little too thin. Do you know what today is? It was Michelle. Who else would be texting so late on a Monday night? My thumb tapped at the side of the phone. It wasn't her birthday. That was in July, and we had gone out and celebrated, and it had taken 2 days to recover. One spent sat at a computer screen pretending to work while dying a little more each passing minute. Who else could it be? I clicked the button once and the date flashed on the screen. October 8th. My mind ran back a year to find anything of significance, and it hit me like a wall of ice-cold air and sent shivers up my spine. Goose flesh broke out on my arms. I texted back. I know. The response was immediate. I'm coming over. 10 minutes later, the door swung open. Michelle didn't knock anymore. She flicked on the light and shut the door with her foot. The rush of air brought with it the smell of booze. Think you might want some company. She sidled over to the single chair, pushed hard against the kitchen island, and collapsed in a heap. She fished out a bottle from the inside of her jacket. I'll get us some glasses. I took 2 short crystal glasses from the cabinet over the bench and held the first in front of her. She leaned forward and poured almost to the top and cradled the bottle to her chest. I'm fine with the bottle. I sat and nodded my head and held up the glass. To Richie. I didn't think it would hit me this hard. She turned up the bottle almost vertical. The smell hit me before the liquor touched my lips. It was the cheap stuff. Not that I am any sort of expert, but everyone knows the almost turpentine smell of the low grade. Just here to get you drunk stuff. I took a small sip. A year. Where has that gone? I fingered at my glass. I dreamed about him the other night. I am at the bridge. The moon is full. I find his phone by the railing and it rings. Richie's name flashes on the screen. I push the button and I say hello, but there isn't any response. No breathing, no static, only silence. I plead with him to say anything, to tell me where he is or why he... She trailed off. Her eyes dropped to the floor in front of her shoes and she rubbed one foot over the other. She looked up. I want to go out there. When? Now? She nodded. I can't. I have work tomorrow. And I'm studying for the bar exam. I need to be there with him. She stood. You're driving. I usually drove whenever the 3 of us would go anywhere together. I don't know why. I guess I didn't mind acting as chauffeur. Michelle rode shotgun and Richie would sit in the middle seat in the back and grin at me every time I looked in the rearview mirror. I tried to imagine him there now and struggled to bring his face to mind. Michelle plugged her phone into the car stereo. She put on What a Wonderful World. A couple of years back, Richie started on medication. He'd always been a bit up and down, but nothing serious. Or so we thought. The pills were supposed to even him out and take the edge off. He went through a honeymoon period with them and was in high spirits whenever we saw him. That's when he started ending sentences with, "What a wonderful world." It became sort of a mantra. As the time wore on, we noticed a change in him. The medication messed with the wiring inside his brain and he became increasingly dark and morose. He kept on saying, "What a wonderful world," but he began using it ironically. He told us a story of a boy he knew from school. He had been missing for over a year until they found his bones in the backyard of an acquaintance who had been cashing his disability checks. What a wonderful world, Richie had said. Michelle sang it now. She rested her head against the window and breathed the words, whispering them. The drive out to Breakwater Bridge takes about an hour. As we neared the bridge, my breathing quickened and my palms were wet against the steering wheel. The alcohol churned in my stomach. I didn't think it would hit me this hard. Is there anything left in the bottle? Michelle passed it over and I swirled it and downed what remained. The bridge is about the length of a football field and sits a solid punt distance above the water. The Breakwater River flows slow and deep below the trees, covering the banks either side. I pulled over onto the shoulder at the entrance to the bridge. It was late and there wasn't much traffic. Lights illuminated the concrete deck and made the moonlight redundant. Michelle ran a hand over the crash railing at the threshold to the bridge proper and stepped onto the concrete deck. Are you crazy? What if a car comes? It will see me. I want to go and look. I followed her onto the bridge, and about a quarter of the way across, Michelle stopped and leaned on the rail and peered over. The water flowed dark below. A cold wind whipped up, and I crossed my arms over my chest. They never did find Richie. He either dropped or placed his phone on the bridge deck before he jumped. His parents held out hope that maybe he'd changed his mind at the last minute and ran into the woods and got himself lost. Or that he survived the fall. But it was always a vain hope, and Richie never resurfaced. The council erected a steel grating on each side of the bridge about 5 years ago. Breakwater Bridge had and has a reputation as the location for a lot of final acts. Maybe the grating deterred some, but others climbed and went anyway. Michelle stepped back from the edge and took the empty bottle from her jacket and swung it high over the grating and out into the darkness. It turned and glinted in the lights as it fell, and then we lost it. The sound the bottle made when it hit the water barely made it back up. What is that? Michelle stood in the middle of the road, looking across to the far end of the bridge. I went and stood by her. A figure stood against the railing, and then the figure started climbing. No! Michelle shrieked. She sprinted down the middle of the road towards the figure. Her arms swung wildly and her feet barely seemed to touch the ground. If the person wearing black heard or saw her coming, they paid her no mind. The figure mounted the top of the grating and paused for a moment, and flung itself out and dropped from view. No! Michelle yelled again. She stopped and went to the railing and searched the darkness. The half moon offered little help. Then we heard the splash. We have to go and help, Michelle said. They won't have survived. How do you know? Come with me. Michelle sprinted the rest of the distance to the end of the bridge and I followed. When she made it to the edge, she slipped below the crash rail and started down the steep slope. I shouted at her to stop. I hurdled the crash rail and skidded down the slope and came up behind her. She had stopped by a tree and held a branch for support. The ground fell away beneath her feet. Do you see anyone? I opened my eyes wide as if it would help and searched the murky darkness. If only we had more light. Michelle took her phone and turned on the torch, but it made little headway into the darkness. Michelle sobbed. The sight we had only imagined until now had become a reality. Our friend Richie had gone the same way as that poor soul. Then we heard a sound from the river. It wasn't a voice or someone swimming, but a rhythmic splashing. Through the darkness, a shape came into view floating on the water. It was a small boat with someone at the oars. It moved out into the stream and then stopped. The person in the boat leaned over and grabbed at something in the water. The boat rocked and the person in the boat hauled a shape out of the water and into the boat. A big, heavy shape. He's picking them up, I said. I've heard of this. People who live near bridges saving people, talking them down. Except that isn't what this is. Yes, it is. The boat rowed back to the shore, and we lost it from view behind the trees. Michelle turned to me. What if they picked up Richie? Richie's gone. He might not be. Help me find a way down. We first went up and then scrambled down the slope, guided by the torches on our phones. As we moved away from the bridge, the bank flattened and the trees thinned. The water lapped against the bank, and the sound of a car engine came from the darkness ahead. Hurry! Michelle set off at a trot, and the light from my phone shook as I tried to keep pace. I bumped into Michelle, who had skidded to a stop. She shone her light onto a small inlet cut into the bank. Two trees with thick trunks overhung the channel and hid it from view. A rowboat rocked gently at a wooden pier. A track led up from the pier, and out of the darkness a set of taillights shone. Without turning back or saying a word, Michelle raced up the track after the retreating vehicle. Wait. I went after her. The track was narrow and the ground hard beneath my feet. The vehicle turned a bend and the lights disappeared. Michelle kept on at a pace. Wait! Hurry, we're losing them! We can't lose them! We climbed steadily uphill and turned bends and caught errant tree branches in the face. We had gone far enough that I could no longer hear or see the river. Michelle's words played over in my mind. People who live near bridges, they talk them down. The person hadn't been on the bridge, but under it. Ahead was a light. A porch light shining over a deck with a single chair and a small round table. A cabin in the woods. Besides the cabin was a separate structure, light spilling out from a half-open door. Inside was a black truck that surely had been the vehicle we had followed. From the room came shouting. A man's voice. Michelle slowed to a walk and pocketed her phone. I did the same. We don't know who this is, I said louder than I would have liked. He might know about Richie. Michelle pressed on, the gravel of the driveway crunching under her shoes. We were close enough now to discern words amongst the shouting from inside the garage. Come on, breathe, damn you, breathe, come on. Maybe Michelle had been right. She tilted her head to the side as she neared the garage and tried to get a look at the man within. Something moved on the left-hand side and the shouting ceased. Michelle palmed one side of the double swing door and inched it open. Excuse me? A man wearing a black raincoat and dark waterproof pants jumped and turned. He had been leaning over a workbench where a body lay, wet and unmoving. The man placed his right hand in his jacket pocket and kept it there. Who are you? What are you doing? We saw you. From the bridge? Did you save him? The man in the coat turned his eyes down at the body on the bench, then back up to Michelle. I couldn't revive him. Should we call an ambulance? I said. Towels covered the bench where the body lay. A rolled up sleeve exposed naked white flesh, and beside it lay a used syringe. No, he's already gone. The man opened the cupboard below the bench and pulled out a white sheet and covered the body. As he pulled up the sheet, I took a look at the face. It was a boy, a teenager, maybe just out of high school. Purple welts bruised his skin at the neck. There's nothing more to be done. We should call an ambulance, I said. The man straightened and his right hand went back into his pocket. He took a step forward and stood directly below a single light bulb hung by a wire from the ceiling. The man lowered his big brown eyebrows and shadow engulfed his eyes. He parted his lips. Several teeth were missing and I caught a hint of a tattoo extending up his neck. You won't get any reception up here. We can't call anyone. I checked my phone. The man was right. I had no service. The man took another step forward and I instinctively took a step back. Michelle, through either determination or curiosity, or by the recklessness imparted by all the alcohol, stood her ground. A year ago, Michelle said, our friend jumped from the bridge. His name was Richie. Did you save him? I never asked their names. Is Richie alive? Michelle shook and her voice faltered. The man in the coat took his right hand back out of his pocket and rubbed his hands together and looked Michelle in the eye. No, he isn't. Come inside and we will drink to the departed. The man exited the garage and held the door open and motioned us towards the cabin. We waited for him on the porch while he locked the garage. He was thick-set and his boots fell heavy on the steps. He unlocked the door and we followed him inside. The cabin was a picture of order. What furnishings there were stood uncovered and in place. Pairs of shoes lined up neatly below a coat rack. No photos or pictures hung on the walls. Every surface was clean and uncluttered. The man went to the kitchen and reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gun and placed it on the counter. He then took a bottle and 3 glasses from a cabinet and sat at the square dining room table. He held out a palm and we each took a seat. He poured into the glasses and pushed them in front of us. I spun mine in my hand and looked over the shoulder of the man to the firearm on the counter. Michelle kept her arms folded in front of her. The man raised his eyebrow and his glass. Cheers. I held up my glass, but I did not drink. Michelle sat with her arms folded, staring at the man in the coat. I guess I'm the only thirsty one. How do you know Richie is dead? Michelle said. The water and the rocks kill most. Sometimes they live, but it's never for long. They come here to die, and that's what they do. What were you doing out on the water? I said. Were you fishing? I'm no fisherman. Then what? Do you sit there in your boat all night and wait for someone to come and jump? Michelle unfolded her arms and leaned forward. I shot her a glance. I wasn't sure if she'd seen the man place the gun in the kitchen. The man leaned back in his chair. They choose to come here. I don't force or coerce them. They jump in and I pull them out. Sometimes I can bring them back. Sometimes I can't. That part is not for me to decide. He drank. There's something I don't understand, Michelle said. What's that? Why don't you spend your time up on the bridge instead of the water below? You'd save more if you could stop them jumping. I need them to choose. Choose what? I said. Choose death. When they jump, they're consenting to die. They give up rights to their own bodies. Empty vessels, I call them. And if I can revive them, I can do what I want with them. And what's that? I give them what they want. I kill them. Michelle balled up her hands into fists. Was Richie alive when you pulled him out? I never asked their names. The man drained his glass and poured another, and mostly what is left of them can't tell me. What a wonderful world, I said almost automatically. The song playing in the car and talking about Richie made me fill that gap just as Richie would have. What a wonderful world. The man repeated. He smiled and chuckled. Did your friend used to say that? My stomach leapt up into my throat and I fought for breath. Michelle stood and leaned over the man. Did you kill Richie? Did you kill him? Michelle was almost shouting now. Her shoulders rose and fell and her hands shook. The man didn't move and took his glass and drained it. I watched the gun on the counter. The man looked at me. I reached under the table and grabbed Michelle at the knee. I wanted to leave. The man had sat himself closest to the kitchen and would be at the gun in about 3 steps. Did you kill Richie? Michelle slammed her fists on the table and the glasses and the bottle jumped and clanged back down. I told you they kill themselves when they jump, but if you want to know what I do with what is left of them, go into that cabinet in the next room and get my laptop. The man pointed at me and then into the next room. Me? I said. When I point at you, I mean you. The man turned to me and I first shrunk down in my chair and then, reluctantly, I stood. My chair scraped against the tiled floor and I almost kicked it over. I went to the wooden cabinet and beside the handle was a lock and in the lock was a small key. I turned the key and tugged the handle but the door did not give. You locked it, the man said. I don't keep it locked. I turned the key back and the lock clicked. I opened the door and inside were neatly piled stacks of books and magazines and a closed laptop alone on a lower shelf. I took the laptop and brought it back to the table. I slid it over to the man and he shook his head and slid it back. You do it. I opened the laptop and turned it on. There was no password and it opened onto a home screen with a monotone blue background in a single unnamed folder. Click on the folder, the man said. What am I looking for? The files are arranged by date. You said your friend jumped a year ago? I'd look for a day or two after that. Inside the folder were video files named and arranged by date. I used the mouse pad to scroll down and found a file dated from 3 days after Richie went missing. I double-clicked the file. The man looked at Michelle. You'll want to see this. Or maybe you won't. It can't be unseen. Michelle came and looked over my shoulder. The video began. It shook at first with glimpses of trees and blue sky and a small patch of grass. A dark shape obscured the camera, and then the shaking stopped and a man walked away from the camera and came into view. It was the man in the coat, the man sitting at the table in front of us. He smiled and waved and moved out of view. A second figure lay on the grass, far and away and out of focus. I leaned in and tried to make out who it was, but I could guess. The camera jolted and the lens zoomed in and removed all doubt. It was Richie, and he was alive. He lay on his back and flailed spasmodically, kicking his legs and pointing his arms to the sky. His right foot veered off to the left at an unnatural angle and appeared to be broken. He smiled and turned his head from side to side in the sunlight. Michelle breathed hard and hot onto the back of my neck. On the screen, the man reappeared. He carried a sledgehammer in one hand. The hammer had a long handle and a huge gray metal head. The man, despite his size and bulk, tilted under the weight of the tool. The man walked over to Richie and dragged him closer to the camera. Richie made no effort to resist and seemed almost lost in delirium. The man placed Richie's head on top of a sawn-off stump at a tree cut to about ankle height. Richie lay on his side and looked directly into the camera and smiled and said, "What a wonderful world." Behind him, the man raised the hammer over his head and gripped it in both hands and brought it down with all his strength. The gigantic head of the hammer pulverized Richie's skull, and it burst into a watermelon. Blood and brain and skull fragments flying in all directions, leaving a flattened and shattered mess. Richie's body gave one last twitch and stopped. The man smiled at the camera and dropped the hammer to the ground and bent his knees as if performing a curtsy. I slammed the laptop shut. The man looked at us, expressionless. He poured himself another glass and drank, his hands lifting the glass smoothly and deliberately. Some things can't be unseen. "You monster," Michelle said. I sat speechless. Why had he shown us the video? He must know we would tell the police. I eyed the gun sitting on the kitchen bench. In a flash, I concluded the man meant to murder us. We had seen the body in the garage. He had shown us his video of Richie. This is it. This is how we die. Michelle stormed into the kitchen and grabbed the gun and stood behind the man and pushed the barrel against the base of his skull. The man did not react. "You killed Richie," Michelle said, her voice quivering. "I've been clear on this point. Your friend chose to die. He jumped and he would have died then and there in the cold water had I not pulled him out. I only delayed the transaction." "He didn't choose to go like that. Butchered like an animal. Worse than an animal." "The method is immaterial, and I promise you he did not suffer." "How can you say he didn't suffer?" I said. The man calmly took another sip. "When I revive them, I inject them, and believe me, they feel nothing but bliss until I finish them." "You immoral monster." "And what have I done that is immoral?" "Anyone who compromises the well-being of another is immoral." If we measure morality on well-being, then there can be no argument. I did your friend a favor. I gave him pleasure he would not have had if not for me intervening, and after his bliss I gave him a swift and painless execution. I increased the well-being of that boy, and brought a little joy to the world. He didn't consent to what you did. He consented to die. You are a monster. Michelle pushed the barrel against the head of the man, and he leaned forward. Why? I said. Why would you do this? I've seen things worse than that. They shipped me overseas and they ordered me to do unspeakable things, and they told me to come back and act like it never happened. The inside of my head is dark and the voices are constant. They pretend to help, but the only help they provide are a bunch of pills and injections that made me something I wasn't. They ripped the soul right out of my body and left nothing but a mumbling and numb sack of meat. And then they took away my doctor and my meetings, and used the money they saved to build that railing on the bridge. And so the darkness returned and the voices grew louder. Doing what I do is the only joy I have. It is the only way to silence the voices, and only then for a while. And I only do it to empty vessels who give their consent by jumping. I am no more a monster than you, or your friend, or anyone else. Richie didn't deserve what you did to him, Michelle said. I didn't walk him to that bridge, and I didn't make him jump. Whatever led him there had nothing to do with me. I took what was already done. He was alive, Michelle said. You could have helped him, and instead you splattered his brains. You're inhuman. Oh, I'm all too human. And now you have to choose. You can pull the trigger and end me and stop this. If you are so sure I'm an inhuman monster, then it should be easy and it won't weigh on you. Squash me like you would a mosquito on your arm. Maybe even I would prefer to be gone. In fact, I do. Pull the trigger. I consent. Don't tempt me. I'm instructing you. Pull it and end me. Do it now and make the voices stop and send me into the darkness. Do it. Michelle straightened her arm and pushed the man's head further forward. Her hand shook and she squeezed her eyes closed and then opened them again, and tears ran down her cheeks. She bent her elbow and dropped her arms to her sides and sighed. She put the gun on the table. The man sat upright and expressionless and drank. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. Michelle bent over the table. The man smiled at me and winked. I put my head to my hands and turned my back. I couldn't bear to look at him, the man who killed my friend. The next thing I knew, I heard a loud pop. I turned and the man slumped in his chair, Michelle's arm outstretched and holding the gun. Michelle brought her free hand over her open mouth. What did you do? I said. I don't know. Michelle's eyes went white and she collapsed to the floor. I laced my arms under her back and sat her up. She mumbled and shook. I leaned her against the wall. I took a cloth from the kitchen and wiped the gun and all the surfaces we had touched. I placed the gun in the hand of the man. I put the 2 glasses the man had taken for us and tipped out the liquor and washed them and put them back. By the time I was done, the color had returned to her face. She bowed her head and shook it slowly. She sobbed. I leaned over and whispered in her ear, "We never ever breathe a word of this." She nodded. "We have to go," I said. "I'm a monster," she said. "No, you're not." We followed the path back to the river. The boat rocked gently in the haven of the inlet. I began to scramble up the slope and up to the bridge. I looked back and Michelle was not there. I slid back down. She stood by the boat watching the river ease by. I grabbed her arm and gave a gentle tug. She did not move. "We have to go. Someone might have heard the shot." She looked up at the bridge and blinked away tears. "We have to go." I gave another pull, and this time she followed. We made it up to the bridge. Deserted in the early hours of the morning, When the car came into view, I started running, my feet slapping against the concrete deck. I became aware that my footsteps were all I could hear. I turned and searched the bridge for Michelle. Then I saw her. She stood by the railing, watching the dark water of the river. She looked up and then started climbing. No! I screamed at her and started running. I skidded to a stop on the concrete deck of the bridge and jumped and managed to grab her by the ankle. She kicked, but I held firm. I pulled and she came loose and we fell together in a heap on the cold concrete. That was a week ago. Michelle is a wreck. She apologized repeatedly on the drive home. She looks like she hasn't slept. I know I haven't. I watch the news each night expecting to see a story about a body discovered alone in a cabin in the woods by the river, and with it a cache of videos found on a laptop. But nothing. I expect a knock on the door or a phone call from the police telling me they found some evidence we left behind and to come with them, please. But only silence. Eventually it will come to light. All of it, I am sure. And what then? Will they call us monsters? There's this girl at my high school. She was perfect. Her deep blue eyes always had an innocent glint to them, and her lips always curled upwards in a beautiful smile. She always helped anyone in need. When she walks as if the earth will crumble if she presses against it any harder. I loved her. I wanted to fess it up, but I don't think she was even aware of my existence. And I've led a miserable life since my parents' separation when I was 9. My mom was negligent and introduced me to drugs. I'm sober now, but I feel withdrawal symptoms now and then. I'm a good student, above average, but nothing too special to note. Not a jock, not a nerd, not a bully, not bullied, just enough to be invisible. So I started following her. Each day, from what I learned about her, she was very punctual, and she was always surrounded. I mean always. There would be many people around near her house, and sometimes they even get violent and try to injure her. But the others stopped them from hurting her. But I noticed some other things that were weird. For instance, her neighborhood was eerily quiet. Only a few people walked down there, except, of course, her other worshippers, who I assume want to stay near her most of the time. I don't think would have seen her parents or guardians in the 2 years I've been following her. Also, every one of her worshippers seems desperate to be with her. From the day I saw her, I couldn't resist her charisma. After all, she was funny, sensitive, and amiable. What's not to like in that, but I think I got too carried away. I've gathered her interests, hobbies, favorite films, and music, and practically forced myself to like them. She watches documentaries, and she's got a thing with paintings of the most obscure artists. I like Rachmaninoff and Beethoven's art, but I wasn't too fond of Mozart's vibe. After 2 years, I finally gathered the courage to ask her out. It was biology, the only subject I did poorly at. The professor always speaks in a monotone with a few sharp changes in tone now and then. Whenever I'm in his class, I feel like I'm in a trance, the kind of feeling you get when you're in an elevator, but compounded. It's at the edge of deep sleep, but then suddenly you're jolted awake. I was so deep in my reverie that I didn't notice that the professor had walked out. It was recess. I walked straight towards Ava, spellbound. It felt like we were meant to be. There was a gravitating effect that was tied to her. Maybe all those worshippers do have a point. She's magnetic. I was lost in my thoughts when I absent-mindedly brushed past her. I turned back when I realized my mistake. I didn't have to initiate the conversation. Hi, would you like to come for dinner tomorrow at 7 at Gary's? quite literally froze. I couldn't speak for a second until I gathered myself and replied weakly, Yeah, sure thing." "Cool," she said nonchalantly, and turned away and joined her large friend group, which was entirely different from the month before. But I didn't really care because by then, I knew she was always with different people. I felt a wave of shock as she left. My spine went cold and I was getting chills. I was anxious to meet her, and when I finally did, she asked me out. Of all people, me? It seemed too good to be true. That night when I returned to my room and started replaying the scene, my reptilian brain kicked in. Something told me not to meet her, that it would be my last night alive if I went to that dinner. Maybe it was my guilty conscience about stalking her for 2 years straight, and the fear that she might be aware of it, the fear of being called a weirdo. The thoughts were too obtrusive. I couldn't handle all this. I felt a sudden sense of withdrawal that I could have suppressed under normal circumstances, but I didn't have the willpower to do so. I know I shouldn't have, but I snorted a teenth of morphine to calm my nerves. Or two. Well, I admit, I lost count of how much, but by then the thoughts eased, and I slowly started to drowse. It was afternoon before I knew it. I slept for about 18 hours. My body felt numb, my hands were clammy, and my vision blurred. I forced myself up. I couldn't feel my legs, and I fell on all fours. I felt a sharp pain in my spine radiating through my body. Did I overdose? Possibly. I just injected naloxone, which I kept handy on my table yesterday. I laid down on my bed again and passed out for another couple of hours. I wasn't really better when I woke up. I was still sore when that feeling returned. The dread of meeting her, by this time, had compounded. It seemed that each fiber of my being refused to go out with her. I tried hard to stop those thoughts and started to get ready for the date I'd been waiting so long for. It was 6:45, and I was at Gary's restaurant. It's a modest place with a vintage vibe, something Ava seems to like. Since 1982, the restaurant banner says. The place had a popcorn ceiling and an old jukebox. Sorry, an ancient jukebox that played Jackson Pollock and other artists from the early 20th century that I couldn't even name. I waited for what seemed like forever. Then suddenly, 5 minutes before 7, that feeling came again. I felt lightheaded, and I was shaking. It must have been the naloxone. I had a sudden urge to retch, and I went to the lavatory to do just that. It was about 7 by the time I returned. She was sitting where I just sat with a huge grin, a bit wider and more cheerful than usual, in a beautiful navy blue dress that complements her expressive eyes. My heart pounded this time. I wasn't sure if it was because of the naloxone or my happiness, and at that moment, I couldn't care less. Any doubt that I had previously about us just disappeared. A sense of warmth went through my body, and the soreness from the overdose vanished. "James?" she called out to me in the sweetest and most gentle tone. Does she know my name? Does she know that I've been stalking her? But I couldn't worry about anything. Not near her. She radiated a soothing vibe, as if all the things bothered me had vanished by mere presence. The soreness in my body disappeared. I don't remember the last time someone spoke with me this kindly. We had a lot more in common than I thought. She was knowledgeable and wise. I had the best and the most productive conversation I've had in ages. But the one thing that set us apart was smiling. I don't smile at all, while she always has a smile plastered on her face at all times. I mean, there are degrees of her smile, but there's always a smile. It was about midnight, and Gary's was about to close. So we decided to go to her house. Her house was really modern on the inside, and she even had a new Nokia 1101, but still, the house felt empty. There's a lot of furniture, pictures, and stuff, but it doesn't feel like anyone is living there. I couldn't bear it any longer, so I blurted out, Ava, where are your parents? They don't live here. They used to live in Scandinavia. Which part of Scandinavia? Oh, sorry, Denmark. They say it's peaceful there and want me to move in with them, but I like it here. Satisfied, we sat on the couch holding hands and watching a documentary that was actually very interesting. After we got tired, we slept next to each other. Before you ask, no, we didn't really do anything of that sort. We both had an unspoken feeling that it just felt wrong for us to elope. But I lay awake the whole night because of the knocking on the doors. The worshippers. They were there when we came home and still hadn't left. I didn't know that they stayed all night. She didn't seem bothered by that. I think she must have become used to it. The next day, by the time it was morning, her worshippers had left. We went to school and I was stunned to find her all by herself and without her friends. When I asked her about it, she replied that no one ever stayed friends with her for long periods and wanted to be alone for a while. Away from all of them. That explains the changing friend groups and worshippers. But I think I see a glint of sadness in her eyes, beneath the smile, which had me worried about her. When I left her to go to my home, I felt a sickening dread cross me once more. I wanted to be with her. I wanted to experience that happiness I felt with her, but at the same time, I felt sore once more, just as I'd felt that day at the restaurant before meeting her. I went to her home because I couldn't bear that feeling anymore. I noticed that her worshippers weren't there too, which seemed strange, but I couldn't be bothered by it. All I could think of was her, and I was afraid I was addicted to her. I felt this way before, with drugs. I know it sounds weird, but I really was addicted to her. Maybe it was because no one I've ever spoken with actually seemed to care about me. She replaced the void inside of me that had been eating me alive. I knocked on the door, and she answered the door immediately, as though she were waiting for me to arrive. I knowingly smiled back at her. I smiled. For the first time in a few years, I couldn't control my smile or stop it. She invited me in, but as I walked past the hallway, I caught a glimpse of her face that startled me. She wasn't smiling like her usual self. Did I upset her? What do I do now? The warmth that I felt around her was still there, but it was getting weaker by the minute. She seated me on the couch while conjuring up a tiny smile, and I was too startled to say anything. Something in her demeanor had changed, while still captivating. She was radiating terror instead of the warmth. Her dark blue eyes were hazel now. I was in a haze to find a reason to rationalize it. James, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have come anywhere near me. It's your fault. What? Before I could complete my question, there was a sharp pain in my gut, as if a red-hot iron bar had gone right through my chest. After a few seconds, the pain had vanished. I stood up from the couch and felt a warm liquid flowing through my stomach. My hand instinctively reached my right abdomen. Blood. I didn't see her carrying the knife she held in her hand. It stained the white tee I was wearing. The moment I saw the blood, all the pain returned to me. I was scared. I wanted to contemplate my choices and think about how different my life would have been if I stopped myself from choosing terribly. Maybe I could have avoided this, but my mind was in a blur and my vision turned narrow. I collapsed on the floor. I could see her watching me from near the hallway, going towards the stairs. The adrenaline wore off and I thought this would be the end of me. I looked back at memories from when my parents were still happy with each other. I tried to imagine my dad telling me not to worry. Everything went dark for a while. I woke up a few hours later on the same couch. This time she was here, hugging me. What the hell, Ava? She didn't answer. She was still smiling. I sat up, moving away from her. As I did, I felt a lot of pain. I forgot about the stabbing. She stood up and came in front of me. She looked as if she had been crying for a while. The warmth I felt near her has been replaced by fear and dread. Did you like being with me? What was that for? Why did you stab me? Did you like being with me? I asked a few more questions to no avail, so I answered her question. Yeah, I used to, until you almost killed me. That's it. The faint smile on her face grew wider, but this time it was too wide, stretching to her cheekbones, and almost suddenly, her creepy smile turned into a grimace. Her stare stung me with sharp pain. She screamed impossibly. It was shrill, but there was a deep growling quality to it. I couldn't process it anymore, so I just stayed frozen. Any slight movement sent pain similar to an electric shock throughout my body. After what seemed like hours, she stopped screaming and started to talk in her usual manner, but it lacked warmth and friendliness. But I could trace a bit of sympathy in her voice as she spoke. Her gaze was too painful for me to bear. James, you must have many questions now, but listen to me carefully as I don't have much time. Please don't interrupt me. Believe in what I say and remember every detail of it. Trust me, it will help you in the long run. I tried to make sense of everything, but honestly, everything felt surreal, as if it was a nightmare. But I focused on everything she said because I didn't really have much of a choice now. I am stuck in a cycle of surviving on others' happiness. That's what keeps me alive. I make people happy, and I steal their happiness. If I don't do that, there will be consequences. People close to you will die. Stealing their happiness will cause them to die internally when they're not around me and cause everyone else to hate them. I will be the only person who provides them with happiness and a feeling of safety. I had to kill 100 people to break free. You are the 100th one, James. You have to carry my lifestyle. Let me get straight into this. You don't need food or water to be alive, and you can't kill yourself to escape this torture. When one of your victims' happiness runs out, they just fade out of existence. Their family will know that they existed, but they won't remember their name or appearance. You have to stab your 100th person, and while they're out, recite the phrase. I've written everything out for you just in case I won't finish telling you this. She managed to tell me weakly. I didn't want to believe her, but this explained the date night. I have never seen her eat nor drink anything. She disappeared at school lunch. Most of all, her friends, the worshippers. I knew a lot of them, but when I think of their names and their appearance, but as I do so, their memory becomes even more distant than it was before. I couldn't ask any other questions. She had a blank expression on her face. She handed me the paper. As I opened the paper, I caught her fading into the space. A few seconds later, it was as if she was never there before. I was seriously considering that this was a hallucination, but I can't explain the blood on my shirt and the letter in my hand. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't myself. My brown hair went to a dirty blonde. My brown eyes went to a deep blue. I was taller than usual, and my scrawny and thin body had a bit of muscle. Not too much, just enough to be attractive. When I looked at my face, I freaked out. I had a smile. I can't stop smiling. I reached my hand to my abdomen to find that the place she stabbed me had healed, leaving a scar. I went back to the living room to read the phrase I had to tell. You shall have to pay for happiness with your smile. That wasn't a long time ago. Everyone from my town forgot me. I took on a new identity and moved to a big city. Everything she said was true. Couldn't off myself, didn't have to eat, and I couldn't stop smiling. It physically hurts to smile, but she forgot to tell me that I can't sleep. But now I'm questioning whether it's because of the curse or because of my guilt. There's a large number of people, worshippers, around my house now. They don't behave like themselves. They slowly lose themselves, but I always try to be patient with them. It turns out that my victim causes me to look different. If my victim likes a girl, I'll morph into a girl, and I have no control over it. I can trap one person at a time, and I've noticed that people are starting to like me. It would have been a dream come true for my former self, but I despise every second of living like this. I've trapped 87 people until now. 87 people faded out of existence. I kept writing their names and clicking photos of them, but the evidence always found a way to disappear. Photos get deleted, and the books where I write their names are lost. My memory of them vague. I couldn't bear to deal with this secret all by myself, so I turned to Reddit in order to share this with people. So if you ever find yourself with a person who seems to love you and care about you, with their eyes reaching the depths of your soul telling you that it's okay and they understand you, remember that you might as well be talking with me. You'll never know. Not until it's too late. So I'll give you some advice. Whatever happens, don't smile. Do not smile at me. Growing up, the word no was illegal in my house. So when my mom asked, "Isn't there something you'll miss about this place?" all I could do was hang my head and shuffle my feet. She sighed and shook her head, and I slipped out onto the porch as quickly as I could. Nothing good came from that sigh. Outside, I stared at the old windmill that turned in jerky starts. Behind it was the hazy midday sun, and then nothing else until the horizon. I stood out on this porch I would never see again and searched around for some emotion. Some feeling that would tell me the only home I had lived in up until now meant something, but nothing came. Any regrets or woes I had were swallowed up in the jittery excitement of a dream coming true. Tomorrow we would start our new life in the city. Not the big city, mind you, but big enough when compared to a shack trapped in the middle of nowhere, whose only neighbor for miles was a wheat field that stretched past what the eyes could see. The wheat field, I thought. Or more precisely, the maze inside the wheat field. When my dad had planted the wheat, he was careful to leave paths between the stalks to make it easy to get from one side to the other. As a child, this had taken my imagination by the reins and driven it wild. I would often journey into the fields and take whatever turns I came across, acting as an explorer traversing a maze, housing deadly secrets and perhaps a minotaur or something. I looked back at the sun in the sky, then at my watch. The city kids would use their phones to tell time I had heard, so I hoped that my mom would get me one of those before school started, and decided a quick trip into the maze for old time's sake couldn't hurt. Happy now, Mom? I found something to miss about this crappy old place. I went back to my room and dug through the things to throw away box, and found my old maze explorer kit. It was just a tiny little pouch to the much older me, but as a kid it had seemed a certified utility bag full of gadgets and tricks that any explorer would kill for. I dove into the wheat fields and started taking turns as soon as I came to them. I was much taller now, tall enough that the wheat no longer towered over me as it had, but they were still huge and blocked out everything around me. I was in my own little world again, just like I had been so long ago. In this world, I didn't have time to worry about what I would miss, or how different city life would be. If I dallied, the Minotaur would get me, or I would get lost in the maze, or perhaps something even worse would find me. Something as old as this farm, which had apparently been passed down for generations upon generations. I explored for at least an hour and realized that I was now sufficiently lost. Of course, you could never actually be lost in a field of wheat. All you had to do was pick a direction and walk towards it, and eventually you'd hit a road or the house or the far barn. I was standing in a four-way intersection of sorts, where two different paths had converged, and looked for where the sun bled through the wheat the brightest. I began walking in that direction. For the first hour, my thoughts were back onto mundane things. Tomorrow I would drive 4 hours to the city with my mom, and then I would never, ever have to come back to this place. Tomorrow I would see my new apartment for the first time, and my new school the day after. A real school. No more homeschooling for me. I hoped I would be able to make actual friends and not just play with my poor cousin who hated this old farm nearly half as much as I did. For the second hour, I tried to focus on something else, but worry began to seep in. When the third hour was nearing its end, I found myself fighting panic. I grabbed my explorer supply bag and pulled out the tiny compass my dad had brought me back when he first caught me in the wheat. I remember thinking he was mad. He was always mad about something. But he just quietly handed the compass to me and told me, "You can never get lost with this. Find south and walk that way, and you'll always find your way home." But today the compass would not show me south. It spun wildly, and then it would stop, pointing in a random direction, but anytime I would start lining it up with the N, it would start spinning wildly again. I turned and turned, tried to remember what direction the sun set in, but with the wheat as high as it was, did it grow taller since I came in? I couldn't tell which direction I was even in. There was a black movement in the corner of my eye. The stalks rustled. I stood, frozen, staring into the spot where several stalks of wheat gently rocked back and forth, as though they had been disturbed. I tried to gulp with my dry throat and listened as closely as I could for a sound, but the wheat was still. I looked at my compass, and to my surprise, the red arrow was pointing to S. It took me a long while to get my courage up, but I did start walking again, right towards the spot where the black shadow had appeared so briefly. Just a trick of the light. The wheat moved because my bag hit it while I was spinning, but my bag wasn't long enough to reach the wheat there, and I knew it. I just pretended I didn't. As I walked, the wheat seemed to grow taller, and the shadows definitely grew longer. I was sure I was walking south now as the shadow stretched toward the east, but every shadow seemed to me to be watching me, poised to move, poised to lunge. I walked faster. My watch was strange now. I had been counting seconds to keep my calm, but 5 minutes of counting had apparently cost me the better half of an hour. The wheat was still and quiet, and the shadows harmlessly stretched longer, but the sunlight was disappearing rapidly. I needed to get home, and fast. A sound again, this time from the east. I started walking so fast that it may as well have been running. The sound again, longer this time, from the northeast, and it sounded like movement. I was running now, nearly sprinting, and the sound increased in frequency. Behind me in the north, to my side in the west, now the southwest. Now. I stopped. The sound was in front of me now. Rustle, rustle, it said, and the wheat all around did just that. I was sweating wildly, and my breath was coming from me in gasping near sobs. My heartbeat was loud enough to wake the dead, but still, I could hear it coming, getting closer and closer. I thought to run, but remembered the pocket knife in my explorer's bag. It had been another gift from my dad, a secret from my mom. one of many secrets from my mom. I had it out, the tiny blade at the ready, just as night fell in full. In the starlight, I could make out a spot in the wheat before me where the shadows drew around something darker than the blackness of the maze. I held on to the pocket knife for dear life, but my knees were ready to betray me. "This way," a voice said from my left. The voice was familiar, but that made no sense. I ran toward it anyway. Whatever had been in front of me was now chasing me. I could hear the sound of wheat rustling at first, and then it sounded like they were bending and warping. I looked back, and sure enough, stalks were falling limp to either side in the wake of whatever was coming. I couldn't see it. All I could see was that it was a shade of black so dark, it seemed to devour the moonlight and starlight that fell upon it. It was getting close now. My legs were starting to falter. I had never been an athlete. To my right, I heard the familiar voice again, and I turned sharply just in time to hear the wheat around where I had been standing get sliced clean in half. I didn't think I could run any faster, but somehow I did. It wasn't fast enough. A cold, wet thing grabbed the back of my shirt. Fortunately, it was an old t-shirt, and a chunk of it ripped away, allowing me to keep running. Unfortunately, I stumbled with the sudden movement. It grasped my arm and kept me from falling, then started to drag me backwards towards the wheat. I pulled and screamed and hit at it, but my hand seemed to pass into nothingness, and came out damp and hot and chilled, numb. Just as my feet gave out and it started to drag me, I saw a light out of the corner of my eye from just behind. The thing let me go, and the familiar voice whispered in my ear, "Come on, kiddo, run." I did. I came bursting out of the wheat field drenched in sweat. I rolled across some grass and looked back to see the blackness slam into the wheat, which rocked forward like a wall ready to fall over, but the wheat held, and the thing stopped where it was. I saw it move back and forth as a shadow across the stalks at the very edge of the field, but it could not break through whatever threshold was there. Eventually, it stopped, and seemed to recede back into the wheat field. I turned, wondering where I had ended up, and I did a quick double take. I was on my dad's favorite hill overlooking the house, the wheat field, and the rising moon, which was already halfway through the sky. In front of me, just as it had been the last time I had come to this hill, was my dad's grave. A simple mound with a cross stuck in that said, "Here lies a more dedicated man than there has never been." "That doesn't make any sense," I said, and the familiar voice now next to me responded, "Kiddo, you're gonna find that most things in this life don't make sense." I turned, bathed in moonlight, so much so that he looked to be projected from it, stood my dad. "What?" I said, and not as a question. He just nodded. "You're going to the city tomorrow," he said. "We are. You're gonna love it." That doesn't sound like something my dad would say. How do I know you aren't that thing trying to get me? I asked him. He shrugged. "You're right. It's not something I would have said to you, but it is something I should have said to you. I loved this place," he said, looking down at the house. "And I ain't talking about the wheat or that old shack, except maybe the old windmill. I loved it 'cause where the two of you were." "Oh," I said. "Sure could have fooled me." "Now, though, the two of you ain't gonna be there anymore, so I've got no real love for this place no more. Now I can say with all my heart, you'll do just fine in that big old city." "I doubt it," I said. "You've seen the way I dress. I talk like you. I've never actually seen a smartphone. They'll know I'm a bumpkin. They'll call me a hillbilly." My dad laughed, and I finally believed that it was really him. He laughed so rarely, especially as he got older and his hair came out and his skin grew sallow. But it was one of the best sounds in the world. I started crying. Dad made to pat on the shoulder but stopped, then turned away. I thought I saw a tear in his eye too, but that was impossible. Even if he rarely laughed, he absolutely never cried. We stayed like that for a while, just under the moonlight, watching the home we had once lived in. By the way, what even was that thing? He shrugged. No idea. Your great. He took out his finger to help him count. Great. Granddad wrote some old notes about how the guys he got this land from warned him about it. Says he got an exorcist to trap the thing. Didn't say what kind of exorcist. Well, why didn't you warn me about it? Because I didn't believe it existed. Your great-grandpa and your grandpa never talked about it if they saw it. I only ever saw it in the night. On the night your mom and you said you were moving to the city, with or without me. I got quiet at that, but thinking, I made a connection. Is that what killed you? I asked my dad. He shook his head slowly at first, then faster. Nah, I died exactly how you think I did. An accident. And an embarrassing one at that. Do me a favor, you hear? Tell your new city friends that I died fighting a bear. There ain't no bears around here, Dad. I laughed. Only deer. Then tell him it was a real big deer, with antlers like a tree of knives. And he made a set of knife tree antlers with his hands on the side of his head. Alright, Dad. I laughed. I sat watching my knees for a bit and then started. Hey, Dad. There you are, my mom shouted from behind us. I turned to see her and noticed my dad was already gone, and so was the wheat field that should never have been there. I've been looking everywhere for you. What have you been doing? Nothing, Mom. Sorry to worry you. I swear, she said, but then stopped and took a look at the scenery, then last at Dad's grave. Come on, let's get you home. You need to pack. The next day, I watched as the car moved onward, and that old home, our home, disappeared into the distance. Mom, I said, I know what I'll miss. Oh yeah? What's that? She asked, seeming disinterested. The way Dad used to laugh. Mom turned and looked at me then, although I wasn't ready to look at her. Yeah, she said in a thick voice. Yeah, me too. My friend Finn and I had a gardening business. We were students, so we didn't have a lot of money, but Finn's stepdad used to have a gardening business of his own, and he had a lot of spare tools lying about. Neither of us had a lot of gardening experience, but we were fairly confident that we'd pick up what we needed to know pretty swiftly. How hard is it to use a lawnmower anyway? We advertised on Facebook and got a good number of responses. It was April and a lot of pensioners wanted their gardens sorted out before the summer. In those early jobs, we got good at gardening. We got confident. We learned how to weed and how to identify what we actually needed to weed. We learned how to paint fences and how to seed grass and how to pull out moss from the ground and how to use a screwdriver to pull out dandelions. We bought better tools, bought thicker gloves. Whilst I continued to wear my tracksuit bottoms, Finn bought actual gardening trousers. We began to look the part. Towards the end of our studies, we began to look for one last job, something that would give us a lump sum before we went into our last summer holidays, before embracing the dreaded work life. We started advertising on other websites besides Facebook, even started handing out leaflets. We gave ourselves a name, Green Toes. Silly, I know, it started as a joke, but it quickly stuck. We put up adverts in shop windows, stapled them onto posts next to missing cat posters, and one day, we got a call. It was from a local church, an old Baptist. looking for someone to come and sort out their front and back gardens. They had grass that needed cutting, ivy that needed removing, bushes that needed trimming. All jobs we were comfortable with. Only thing is, the guy on the phone told me, the back garden's also a graveyard. Only thing is, Finn wasn't too keen on taking the job until he heard how much he was offering us. The church had closed down a few years ago, but it had just gone into the care of a bigger church in the town nearby, and they had a lot of money to spare. 2 full days of work, and we'd be getting $300 each. Enough to buy another pair of gardening trousers, I told Finn. We took the job. We found the church on Google Maps. Its entrance and front garden were accessible via a main road. Most of the garden was pebbled, although weeds grew between each stone. The church itself was quite small. An early 20th century build, red bricked, industrial, your typical Baptist. Uninterested in glamour, hard and durable. No stained glass windows, no signs of the cross. A few spare gravestones lined the outside of the church, pressed against the walls. The photo of the backyard came from a side road, a housing estate. Through a metal gate, we could see everything. It looked worse than we'd expected. Long grass, knee length, uphill for about 40 meters, and then the church. About 200 gravestones, all of which would need to be cleared with the strimmer. A long fence dividing the church from another property, covered in ivy, thick streams of the stuff. 2 days, we realized, was not a lot of time, but 300 was a lot of money. The first morning of work arrived, a Saturday. We got up at 8 a.m., packed the car with our tools. Finn had a big breakfast. All I had was an apple. We filled our water bottles, filled our rucksacks, made our sandwiches. We put on our boots, tightened our laces, slathered ourselves in sun cream, tried not to think about the size of the job, about that uphill back garden, about all that ivy. We got to the church at 9 a.m., and the man who'd talked to us on the phone was already there. He introduced himself as David, shook both of our hands. David was a tall man, at least 6'3", slightly overweight and balding. At a guess, I'd say he was in his 60s. On time, he said, looking at his watch. Good start. He showed us around the front of the property, and it was as bad as the pictures suggested. You could spend a full day on your knees pulling weeds out of the pebbles, and the garden would look exactly as it had before. Then he took us down a small alleyway that led to the back of the church, and I felt my heart drop. Although most of the grass was still as the pictures had shown, some of it had now reached waist height. Along the edge of the property diving fence, there were now large mounds of dirt, from which the ivy seemed to be growing from. We asked David what he wanted us to do with all of the grass and garden waste we'd create over the course of the 2 days, and he showed us a spot of pavement that had been placed next to a picnic bench near the back of the church. Put it all here, he said. David unlocked the church, even gave us a key. Although we didn't have time to look around, he plugged in our extension for us, and whilst we got our lawnmower out of the car, he got his own patrol-powered one out of the back of his van. Use this, he said. You're both going to be quite busy. And with that, he shook our hands again, wished us well, and left. We had the church to ourselves. First job was the back garden, mow all of the grass, and then trim the edges of the gravestones. Try not to think about all of the bodies buried underneath us. Mowing the lawn was monotonous, more tiring than anything. Walk down the hill, struggle to turn around at the end of it, walk back up towards the church. Pretend you're not sweating. Pretend you're not bored. Pretend your back's not hurting. I told myself stories. Wished I'd brought my headphones with me. Occasionally, I'd stop to read a gravestone. Most stones belonged to people who'd been buried in the early 1900s, before the First World War. The stones looked older than that, looked Victorian, crumbling, cracks in the marble and rock. By lunchtime, we'd finished most of the mowing. We took a quick break, ate our sandwiches. "This isn't worth it," Finn said. Although we both knew that it was. We'd emptied our water bottles, and we both needed a piss. So we decided to head into the church for the first time. It looked exactly as we'd expected. One large room, 2 stories, with church pews on the second floor looking down towards the pulpit. A stack of Bibles were leant against the wall. Looked as if they'd been left there since the 1970s. Some of them were water damaged. A door at the end of the room led into a corridor, which led towards the kitchen and the bathrooms. The wooden floor sank as we walked. I thought that the planks might split beneath our weight. When we entered the bathroom, there was a long moment of confusion. There were 3 stalls, and one of the stalls was shut. The lock had been drawn. Occupied. Finn and I looked at each other, raised our eyebrows. "Must be a ghost," I said, and Finn laughed. We were both nervous. Finn got onto his knees, lowered his head towards the floor, looked under the stall. "Nothing there," he said, and got back up to his feet. At least there were 2 other toilets we could use. I went for a piss, and I took my time. I think I was scared that I'd leave the stall and find the other one open, the toilet now unoccupied. When I left my stall, I found Finn washing his hands and the other door still locked. "Ghost's taking a while," Finn said. That afternoon, we focused on pulling the ivy off of the fence. It was a better job than mowing the grass. At least we got to do it together. Got to talk to each other. We talked about the toilet stall, admitted that it was a little creepy, but we didn't think too much of it. We talked about university, about it coming to an end, shared stories we'd told each other hundreds of times, talked about home, about work, even talked about God for a bit, which felt suitable, being at a graveyard and all. Talked about football, about rugby, about television, about Marvel. Talked about the toilet stall again. And then we reached the end of the ivy, that last mound. We'd already filled up a wheelbarrow with the stuff, and the pile that had formed next to the picnic bench was massive. But this mound looked to be double the size. A big growth of dirt and soil and rock and moss and grass, wrapped in thick vines, tangled and knotted and seeped. "Gonna be here a while," Finn said. And then we got to work with our shovels. It must have been after the 2nd or 3rd scoop that my shovel hit the stone. At first we thought it was a rock. Tried to find the end of it. A few more turns with the shovel showed us otherwise. Beneath all of the dirt, beneath the soil, beneath the leaves and the grass and the ivy, there was another gravestone. It was laid flat, laid into the earth, and it was shaped like a cross. And it wasn't a small stone, probably about 4 feet long. We swept it with a brush, searched for a name. It was unmarked. "Crap," Finn said. "Maybe the name's on the other side," I said. We cleared the soil, the ivy, the dirt away, filled the wheelbarrow multiple times, until only the gravestone was left, sunk into the earth. "Which one of us is lifting it then?" Finn said. But I was already stood behind it, already prying my fingers into the ground, feeling the edge of the cross through my gloves. I heaved with my back, let all of its weight go into my arms, and lifted the cross out of the soil. I felt the stone digging into my stomach. I felt the mud drenching my t-shirt. Imagined spiders and bugs and worms crawling on the surface, exposed to the light, scattering towards my hands, and now I was pushing the cross, pushing it so that it would stand up on its own, still feeling the weight of it against my torso. For a second, I held it at arm's length. I got a good look at the hidden side of the stone, covered in dirt, but insectless, lifeless, not even damp. Completely flat, untouched, nameless. It hasn't got a name, I told Finn. And then I took a step back, let go of the cross, let it fall back to the trench it had made in the soil. It landed with a thud, nearly landed on my own feet. Neither of us wanted to say what we were thinking, what we thought an unmarked gravestone might mean. Probably someone who had done something really bad, someone who needed to stay unknown. Maybe a John Doe or a Jane Doe. Maybe someone who had been in an accident. Not the sort of person who had died happily. We should tell David, Finn said. They'll want to stand it up again. I agreed. We'd tell him at the end of the day, when he came to give us money. We moved to the front garden, to pulling out all of those weeds. We didn't need to talk about the decision. It was instinctual. I think we both wanted to be as far away from that cross as we could possibly be. A few minutes into working, I realized that I'd left my water bottle in the back garden. It was about 2 p.m., and the sun was fully glaring down on us. I worked for another half an hour, pulling weed after weed out of the ground, filling up the wheelbarrow, before I decided that I really needed my bottle. Finn kept on plucking at the pebbles. Didn't even notice. When I took the wheelbarrow and entered the alleyway, thick shadows fell across the walkthrough. I could hardly see the back garden. Part of me dreaded what I would find, dreaded seeing that cross again, dreaded the feeling it would give me. I looked down at my top and saw the soaked stains that it had left behind. They were orange, looked like clay, almost looked like blood. When I entered the garden, I tried not to look at the gravestone. Instead, I made my way to the picnic bench, quickly poured out the pile of weeds. I found my water bottle leaning against the fence, put it in the wheelbarrow, turned to face the alleyway. And then I saw the cross, hidden towards the back of the garden, hidden near the fence, almost completely hidden in shadow. But there was something on the stone, only there for an instant, but there nevertheless. I felt myself stop, felt myself drop the wheelbarrow, as the thing took to the air, shot off away from the cross, and I got a good look at it, at its red underbelly. Like a flying black widow, just a robin. I took a deep, relieved breath, felt the sudden urge to piss myself, knew that it was probably time for another toilet trip. I entered the bathroom and the stall was still occupied. It bothered me less this time, as if the cross had stolen its place the scariest thing about this church. It had probably been left locked by the last occupants of the church. Or maybe the toilet seat was broken, and the church didn't want anybody to use it. I entered the stall next to the occupied one, closed the door, lowered the hatch. Deep breaths. It was just a robin. Stay calm. I pulled my trousers down, took a seat, did my business. More deep breaths. Long, slow breaths, and... creak came from the stall next to me. I looked up, looked at the stall divider, held my breath. There was a long silence and then... footsteps leading out from the toilet stall. And then silence again. And that feeling of being watched as if something had turned to face me. As if something knew that I was in there. As if something was reaching out towards my door. Towards the lock. Towards me. Reaching with cold fingers. More silence, but then something breaching it. Something deep and heavy. Something like a heartbeat, or like breathing. Something thick, something wet, and the footsteps again, louder this time. I looked down, looked through the tiny gap between the door and the floor that exposed the rest of the bathroom, but I could see nothing. Nothing until I could see boots. Black rubber boots, working boots, covered in mud, covered in clay, stained orange, stained red, big boots, size 13s, thick, stained, heavy boots. They stopped in front of the door. There was only that heavy breathing, wet breathing, gargling red breathing. I stayed still, held my own breath, thought about closing my eyes. It's probably just David, I tried to tell myself. The boots didn't move, didn't flinch, although the breathing had changed into something else now. Something like a laugh, the cackling of a witch, somehow high-pitched and low-pitched at the same time. And then the boots turned away from me, turned towards the bathroom exit. Footsteps again, weighty footsteps because the boots were moving away, moved out of sight. I heard the door open and close, and then there was silence again. Just David, I told myself. I stayed on that toilet for another 10 minutes just in case that thing, or David, if it was him, was still out there. I stayed long enough to start wondering why Finn hadn't come to check if I was okay. I went on my phone, scrolled Reddit, liked a few photos on Instagram, tried to keep myself calm. Walking past the cross was a nerve-wracking experience. I kept my eyes on the wheelbarrow, on the water bottle rolling around inside, tried to stop my hands from shaking too much. Wouldn't look at the cross, wouldn't even dare thinking about it. Wouldn't look at the ground in case I saw boot prints, in case I saw a trail of red and orange, size 13 engravings in the earth. It was only when I reached the end of the alleyway that I realized that something was wrong. Finn was huddled over the ground, dead silent, unmoving, his elbows painted into the pebbles as if he was trying to keep himself balanced. I approached him slowly, left the wheelbarrow behind. "Proper weird," he said, and now I could see his pale face, his gray pupils. He was holding something in his hands, something tiny, something fragile. It looked like it was made of paper, looked like a rolled cigarette, looked like it could have been made of terracotta. Finn handed it to me. It was solid, warm, covered in dirt but smooth, uncracked, unblemished. A bird bone. Finn pointed to where the bone had come from, where it was one of many, hundreds of little bones, and rib cages and skulls, all belonging to birds, all buried beneath the pebbles. One tug of a weed and they'd all come tumbling out, spilling from the ground. I tried not to drop the bone as I put it back into the pebbles, put my arm on Finn's shoulder. "Just birds," I said, because this shouldn't be freaking us out as much as it was, because there was obviously a reasonable explanation. "Just bones," I said, and he nodded. And then we saw the robin. It was perched on the roof of the church, looking down at us, a worm in its mouth, a white worm, small, perhaps it had been bitten in half, a solid worm. No, not a worm. A bone, a bird bone. The robin cawed, opened its beak wide, and then it tried to swallow. The bone caught at the back of the robin's throat, forced its beak open, but the robin crunched down. With a snap, the bone disappeared, and then the robin flew off in the direction of the cross. We shoveled the bones into the wheelbarrow, and then we got back to pulling up weeds. We were side by side, but we were silent. I could tell that Finn wanted to talk, that he wanted to say something about the bones, about the robins. "I saw something," I told him, "in the bathroom." He turned to face me. His face was pale again. "What?" he said, as he dug out a weed root with his fingers. "Like the bird?" "Yeah, but something else," I said. And I told him about the boots, about those heavy, Old boots that I still think about now when I close my eyes. Those boots that stepped right into my fingertips when I began to write this story. And that breathing that I sometimes hear when the world is quiet. When everyone's asleep and the lights are out and my bedroom is all shadow. Finn listened patiently. Didn't say much, just nodded when I reached the end. Didn't say if he believed me, but he didn't need to. It was hard not to believe somehow. We'd both seen that robin, seen the way it had eaten that bone. Something wasn't right about this church. This ground was about as far from holy as you could get. We still had to strim around the gravestones, which is the only reason why we decided to go around the back of the church. And the only reason why we hadn't gone home yet was because we both needed the money. Because rent was due next week. Because we didn't want to say that we'd been scared off a job by something that could just be in our imagination. So we got the streamers out of the boot of my car, made our way through the alleyway, towards the backyard, listened for the call of robins. As we reached the end of the alley, I half expected to see those boots sticking out from around the corner, walking towards us, or the boots' fingerprints. Instead, we saw the cross, right in the middle of the pavement, elevated to full height, unsheltered from the sunlight, clean. "You seeing that?" Finn asked, and I nodded. I was lent on those old Bibles from inside the church, those old damp tomes, at least 50 of them piled up into a tower, but still not enough to hold its weight, still not enough to support it, and those Bibles looked damper than they had before, soaked all the way through, looked as if they were caving in on themselves, shedding paper. "Can't be real," Finn said. Just as the robin landed on the head of the cross, wings already tucked onto its stomach, its black feet hanging over the side of the rock, and those black eyes staring at us, fixed on us, and with a bone in between its beak, but a bigger bone this time, a bone as long as my arm, a big old fossil of a bone. The robin bit down and its beak went through the bone, split it in two, and suddenly the Bibles collapsed, and the cross fell towards the ground, fell backwards, and the robin took the air. And there were those boots, those heavy boots, and there was the silhouette that wore them. A tall man, a long man, neither dressed nor undressed, skinny with ribs protruding and massive hands, thick hands, scarred hands, hands covered in clay, and those eyes, those horrible eyes of his, the eyes of a robin, and there was a bright smudge of red covering his belly, as if a knife had split his skin in two, as if his guts were trying to get out, and he was smiling, although he didn't have any teeth, and suddenly he was shadow, suddenly he was nothing, suddenly there was only the cross and those Bibles, spewing out across the graveyard as if they had been caught in a wave, and Finn and I were running for the car now, running desperately, and we could hear footprints behind us, heavy boots marching through the yard. I dared to look down and saw that we were no longer running on pebbles. We were running on bird bones, and those footprints were getting closer, were getting heavier, and I could hear that breathing again, and I couldn't find my car keys. Couldn't bloody find them. Couldn't remember if I'd put them in my pockets, and silence. The air felt light, as if something had changed. Something had shifted. The pounding of footprints vanished, and I felt the force of the sun against my neck. I turned to face Finn. Saw him leaned against the side of my car. He was trying to stop himself from vomiting. "No way," he kept on saying. "No way, no way, no way." David pulled up as we were putting the tools back into the boot of the car. We decided to only pack the tools that we'd left in the front garden. We were leaving the lawnmower around the back, as a sacrifice to the church. He stopped his van in front of the entrance. stumbled out, all smiles, looked down at his watch. "It's 4:45, he said. "You've got another 15 minutes. "Think we'll just go home," I said. "This place is really weird," Finn said. "Yeah, we probably won't be coming back." We put in the last of the tools, shut the boot. David watched on, smiling all the while. "I've still got to pay you. $150 each, if you're only doing the one day." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and dropped a coin onto the pebbles. And that was when he looked down and saw his boots. They were old boots. Thick boots. Boots that looked too big for him. Size 13. Covered in clay and dirt, orange and reds. Heavy boots. David scooped up the coin, still smiling, then took out 15 10 notes from his wallet. He held them out towards us. I paused for a long while, unsure as to whether to take them. David was still smiling, still grinning. His hands were massive, way too big, unnatural, and he wasn't as overweight as I'd thought he was, and something seemed to be leaking through his shirt, leaking from his belly, and it looked as if his shirt was turning red, and... "Thank you," David said as Finn took the notes from him. He watched us for one last moment, nodded, and went back to his van. As he closed the door and put on his seatbelt, I noticed that he had a stuffed robin on his dashboard. David ignited his engine, waved, and then drove off. We watched him as he went, both thinking the same thing, but not daring to say it. Before we left, we took one last look down that alleyway. Call it stupidity, or call it instinct. We knew that something had changed, that something was different. The cross was still at the end of the pathway, heavy on its bed of Bibles, but it was no longer unblemished. There was a new engraving, too far away for us to read it, although we could guess what it said. We saw the letter D and the letter V. That was enough. We agreed to never tell this story, to keep it between just the both of us, and we burned that money when we got home. Didn't work another job, and I don't plan on ever doing any more gardening work. It's been a year now, and I've moved away since then, although Finn still lives in the same town. I don't know why I've written this, why I've told you my story. Perhaps because I have this desire, deep within me, to go back to that church, to read the writing on that gravestone. Perhaps because when I think I'm alone, I see the dark blotches of boots behind the thinly lit gaps between the door and the floor. Perhaps because when I take a walk, I see robins watching me from the trees, their bellies red, and I can't help but think of unmarked graves and bird bones. And I can't help but think that some graves are unmarked for a reason, that sometimes the secrets that they are hiding are not supposed to be made known. Those gravestones still need strimming. I still have the key that David gave to us when we first got there. I think that I'm going to go back. It wasn't noticeable at first, at least not from the light-polluted suburbs of Washington, where stars were already barely noticeable grains of salt sparsely speckled throughout the dark night sky. I never thought anything about them was off, those fiery spheres of light residing millions of light years away from my family's home, until my father brought it up at dinner one night. I was inhaling baked potatoes by the hole when I looked up to see him flipping through his folder, ruffling through copies of diagrams and star systems and formulas that gave me headaches just looking at them. My dad was an astrophysicist. He worked as a researcher at the National Lab, and that often meant long and tiring shifts. Some nights, he'd become so glued to his work that he wouldn't come home until it was well past midnight, and I'd hear him go right to bed minutes after coming through the front door without even brushing his teeth or changing out of his work clothes. Other nights, when he had no work, he'd go out into the front yard and set up his home telescope. Those nights were the best. I'd sit with him while he peered through the lens with his eyebrows scrunched in concentration. He'd play with the knobs and gears while pointing the telescope at different directions in the sky. And whenever he saw something he liked, he'd always beckon me over and peer into the lens after him. I'd stare in awe at the speckled gray surface of the moon, the great red spot on Jupiter, and Saturn's adornment of rings. My dad had showed me the more distant stars and galaxies, despite his telescope not being advanced enough to pick up on the details. Nevertheless, I always loved the feeling of being able to see the wonders of space for myself. "Josie," my father said, the first time he spoke since we started eating. He was still staring down at his papers. "Look at this." He slid over 2 sheets of paper. I looked at the 2 images, both taken from his telescope, and could see that both contained a cluster of bright light in the center. "Both pictures of the Sombrero Galaxy," he continued. "Taken 5 months apart, 29 million light years away. Do you notice anything?" I examined the papers a bit more closely. The pictures were printed in black and white and relatively grainy, but I could still see it. The one labeled May 22nd looks a bit dimmer, I responded tentatively, half expecting my dad to start laughing at my incredulous response. Instead, he nodded silently, his gaze lingering upon his plate of untouched food. His response worrying me was an understatement at best. He was never this grave. Sliding me another 2 sheets of paper, I was once again asked to compare the 2. This time, it was 2 pictures both labeled Messier 31, which was a galaxy 2.5 million light years away from us. "The Andromeda," I said, immediately recognizing the celestial body from the countless times I've gazed up at it through the telescope. "It looks the same to me, but..." And then I saw it. Not the galaxy itself, but the surrounding stars in the background. In the older picture, labeled January 22nd, I could see an array of bright dots speckled through the distance. In the more recent one from May, however, I noticed that there was only darkness in the background. I didn't even have to finish my sentence. The silence lingered between my father and I, sharp and clear. My father had discovered something very wrong. The following days, I tried to continue with life as normal. Every day I went to school, came home, did homework, went to bed, and did the same the very next day. My father, on the other hand, started to spend more time at his lab. Sometimes he'd be at work for days straight, leaving me home alone with nothing to do but mull in my thoughts. One night, with me home alone by myself and nothing better to do, I decided to try looking through my dad's telescope. It took me a good few hours to finally fit all the pieces together and mess with the settings, but eventually I figured it out and could start pointing it at different directions in the sky. I started off trying to find Messier 104, or the Sombrero. I knew the galaxy was located near the borders of the constellations Virgo and Corvus, and I found those with relative ease, but I just couldn't find the Sombrero. It was as if it had been wiped clean off the surface of the night sky. Unnerved, I moved on to the Andromeda, which I easily located near the Great Square of Pegasus. The telescope was nothing fancy, so I couldn't make out any small details with it, but I zoomed in as far as I could and just stared at the little sparkle of light. It vanished. Just like that, in the blink of an eye, the light vanished. It was as if some celestial being had exhaled a bit too harshly, and thus caused the stars to go out like flames on a candle. There was no rational explanation I could think of. I swiveled the telescope due north now, desperately searching for another star. Omega Centauri. A cluster of stars, 17,000 light years away. much closer to Earth than either galaxies. I stared at it while holding my breath, fearing for the worst. I counted. 1. It was still there. 2. The stars looked like millions of shards of broken glass. 3. I wondered if those stars had their own solar systems. 4. Were there aliens living on those planets? 5. In horror, I watched as a black cosmic mass quickly engulfed the sphere of twinkling lights. I couldn't describe it. It looked as if darkness itself had gained mass and was now determined to spread to every corner of the universe. Stifling a scream, I fell backwards onto the damp grass behind me. I had seen enough. Without even packing up the telescope, I hopped in my car and started the drive to my dad's workplace. The higher-ups know. I was sitting across from my dad in his clustered office now, surrounded by screens and whiteboards and textbooks. His messy desk lay between us, its surface practically covered by books and folders. All the researchers here know about it. The government has been informed. Then why haven't they told us about it? Why doesn't the entire city know? Why doesn't the world? I was half shouting by now. Everyone's going on with their lives, oblivious to the fact that everything in the universe is disappearing, and we're gonna be next. My dad simply sighed and placed his head into his hands. There's no point in telling the population. We're all going to be gone within the next few days anyway, so what's the point in causing mass panic with no solution in sight? Josie? He continued. You know about the Big Crunch theory, right? Kind of. I responded stiffly, terrified yet curious. It's the idea that whatever force which facilitates the growth of the universe will eventually stop, thus causing space and time to double back on itself. Basically, the universe starts compressing itself. He paused for a while as if not sure how to continue. I wanted him to keep going. But this is different. He started up again. Instead of matter being pushed back, it's instead being consumed. No one here can figure it out. It's as if, as the edge of the universe is pushing in on us, it's devouring galaxies whole as it moves. It violates everything we know about modern-day physics. Abruptly, he stood up from his seat and looked me in the eye. I saw a wave of fear and sadness take over his expression, and I suddenly realized how tired and stressed he must have been these past few days, trying to figure out this phenomena that was well beyond the scope of the human mind. Come with me, he said. There's something I have to show you. I followed him as he went through his office, past blank white hallways, down flights of stairs, and through multiple security doors. His workplace was big, I noticed, and most of it seemed empty. I assume most of the other workers went home to spend their final days with their clueless and blissful families. Finally, we arrived at an iron trapdoor set into concrete floor. Upon opening it, I could see it was some sort of bunker. Neon panels of fluorescent light adorned the ceiling and illuminated the space with a dim glow. The walls were complete slabs of concrete. Along with the floor, wires ran along the cold surface of the floor like worms on the sidewalk after a rainstorm. The air was filled with the droning sound of buzzing machinery. In the center of the room stood a metal box. It was maybe the size of a small telephone booth, with hundreds of wires running into it. After walking closer, I could see that there was a door which led inside, which stood slightly ajar. LED lights flashed from multiple panels all over its interior. You built this in the past week? I turned to stare at my dad, incredulous. He smiled, an expression that looked more sorrowful than happy, and shook his head. I've been working on this since I started working here 10 years ago. I just spent the last few days finishing it up. Ever since I've learned about Einstein's theory of the multiverse, he continued, I've been determined to prove it. I haven't had time to test this out yet, but it's supposed to transport matter into parallel universes without wormholes by compressing matter into... He stopped suddenly. I watched as he walked up to me and firmly clasped his arms around my shoulders into a hug. The shoulder of my shirt was damp, I realized. He was crying. "I'll miss you, Josie," he choked out. Then he let out a weak bark of laughter. Who knew my side project was going to come in use one day? "What do you mean?" I asked, now starting to tear up myself. "Are you going to send me away? Aren't you coming with me?" "It's too risky. The more matter the machine has to transport, the more unstable it becomes. It's safer if it's just you. You have to live on. You have to warn the others. Who knows if this situation is limited to just our time frame?" Before I could protest, he led me to the booth. "I love you, Josie. Don't forget me." Those were his last words before he shoved me in and closed the door. I felt everything go dark and then I was falling. When I woke up, I was in my bed, except my bed was on the wrong side of the room, and my walls were blue instead of purple. I turned to look around and spied the window. Quickly, I shot out from under my covers and yanked open my curtains. Sunlight streamed in through the glass. Sunlight. The sun was still here. I heard a knock on my door. "Come in," I tentatively responded. As the door opened and the visitor came in, I saw that it was a woman. I immediately recognized her as my mother through my memories, even though I never remembered living through those memories. In my old life, my mother had left us when I was 5. She took one look at me and knew. "You also had to leave, right?" My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together to go hiking somewhere further from home. We'd been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back and finally found the time. Well, she always made the time. It was mainly me that had trouble balancing work with anything else. Looking back now, I wish I had spent more of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I had been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip. The week before we left, she was texting me about restaurants in the area, stuff to do. She made a Spotify playlist with both of our favorites so we could listen to 7 hours worth of an electric mix of classic rock, pop, and black metal, and was marking trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps app. I felt bad for putting the trip off for so long. We got to catch up, explore, try cool food. We had a great trip up into our final hike. We're both in decent shape, and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight, we decided we were going to try a longer, unpaved road that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip, and we decided to take a more difficult and less crowded trail. Initially, it was a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was thinner than we were used to, but so refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran right into Sam's back. I had been falling behind, focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in the soft dirt, so I didn't go sliding down 20 feet to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pines. She looked back at me, her face tight. "Did you see that?" "The deer? Yeah, it was pretty magical." She gave a little laugh as she started up again, as we could both move on to the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. "No, I mean, something was wrong with that deer. It was way too comfortable around me. And I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making these weird sounds." We continued on in silence after that, as we focused on our footing and the scenery, stopping every so often to take pictures. One time when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up on the hill. I got the bear spray out and held on to it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big, too. Eventually, the hiking trail rose to meet the higher part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college, I'd sprained my ankle badly, but couldn't afford to see a doctor. It healed a bit oddly, and since then, my left ankle has been iffy. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment. Walking uphill for an hour in addition to the 6,500-foot elevation, I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit, too. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wildflowers about 10 feet into the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam?" I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder, and I gripped my container of bear spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or more specifically, it was the deer, the same one that Sam and I had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issue approaching me. It was scrawny, walked slowly, but like it had a bit too much to drink, and it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it. "Go away!" I knew it was sick, and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped me the hell out. It cocked its head and seemed to be studying me, looking me up and down. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way which deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam?" She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back, it had gone. "Are you okay? What happened?" "The creepy deer was back. I know it sounds silly, but I think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabid?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically. "Possibly. Or I wonder if it has CWD. Either way, we should probably let the park rangers know just in case." We had decided we'd stick together, but after a few miles, she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down angling my phone weirdly to try and fit the scene in front of me in the frame when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice raised slightly, assuming she was talking to me. Then she screamed. "Sam!" I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was still holding our canister of bear spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time. But then my left foot landed on a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail. My ankle rolled and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes flat on my back, about 15 feet below where I had been standing. It was also dark outside. We'd started hiking at least 6 to 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused, disoriented. Trying to get up was taking all of my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain. As I started slowly moving upwards on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading up to my fall. Sam sounded hurt. She was screaming. I had run after her, and then I fell. Shit. Sam. I called her name, my voice hoarse but no response. My phone was surprisingly only minorly damaged, but I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had our backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I didn't want to stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes, I had slowly and painfully ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was sitting alone, injured, with my back to the woods in the dark. I tried calling her name in case it was her that I had heard. No response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible towards the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily, the ground had evened out because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew that something terrible may have happened to her, but kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind as my calls to her remained unanswered, and it became harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay. I felt my throat tighten and tears roll down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay, and even if she left to get help, I think they would have found me by then. Somehow, eventually I navigated my way to where I thought she had last been. I was hoping maybe if she was injured, she was okay and just out of it and confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed as it was now coated in mud and grime. I heard movement behind me. As the smell hit me, I realized the mud was dirt mixed with blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture. Leaves covered with what was likely blood stuck to my face, and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife, my bear spray, but instead felt something hard, sticky. I was certain I had just found out what happened to Sam and had a good guess at what was about to happen next to me. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear labored breathing coming from above me. I waited, and then, as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. She was covered in blood. Her shirt and pants were torn, but she was alive. I let out a relieved sob and then could no longer hold back the tears. "My God," I whispered as I slowly moved to sitting and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. She stuck to me where her shirt was still a bit wet. Dried blood covered the neck of her shirt and her midsection. Her hands, and unsettlingly, her mouth, were also smeared with blood. I could hear her breathing heavily close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked as I released her. She stared at me but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after what had happened. She was a bit wobbly, but otherwise seemed to be able to walk. As we walked towards the car, she fell behind me, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder, while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had tried to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When we got to her car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to the hospital or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I pictured us making it all the way to here, to the car, and then something breaking the windows, attacking us. I decided we needed to leave now. Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive? I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving her baby. Plus, I wasn't sure I could drive us with my ankle as it was. She said nothing, just cocked her head at me. I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear. I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotion or reaction, I cautiously continued. But I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like, right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road, or just drive straight to the hospital. She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she lost her keys in whatever struggle she had. Luckily, I had her spare with me. I unlocked the doors, and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a bit more because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. Sam, get in, please. Something is out here still. Please. She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped back out of the seat and opened her door for her, and had to guide her in. I buckled her in after she made no move to do so for herself. As we drove and headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior, I kept checking on her. Out of the corner of my eye, she was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now in the better light that she was drooling. Hey, how are you doing? No response, but she began opening and closing her mouth and making a wet gasping sound as she breathed in and out. Her breath reeked and her teeth were tinged pink. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I was worried she had a punctured lung due to the strange sounds she was making. Hold tight. We're about 20 minutes from the hospital. Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something. Her shirt was on inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I had a bad sprain and a concussion, and would need a few stitches, but it felt so good to just be out of those woods. I asked the nurse that came to check on me about how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I mentioned what I had noticed about her shirt and that we may have encountered a sick animal, in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks and I haven't seen Sam since. Her mom hasn't either. She has been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found on the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said. And due to the condition of the body, they were asking for leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This might sound crazy, but I think it's her they found. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left those woods that night. It's my fault. And I don't know what that thing was that I drove into town. If you live in southern Colorado, please be safe. I'm sorry. It was about the third night of a long camping trip with a few buddies. It was supposed to be a simple spring break getaway for a bunch of high schoolers growing up in a mountain town wanting to get trashed. It had been going great. Marshmallows, open campfire, and enough liquor to supply a small army. But that all changed when Albert told the story of the burnt down church of Redwood Forest. The very forest we had been camping at. They say it was built and used by this cult during the late 1800s. One that believed in some Lovecraftian-like god called Aragreth or something like that. Think he was supposed to be the lord of time and life. Something along those lines. He began as we sat around our small bonfire. They say the church had a large ivory statue of the thing in the center that they'd make sacrifices to. He finished, as he set down yet another drink. Okay, and? Parman asked, sipping his beer. This supposed to be some sort of ghost story? Teddy chimed in as he roasted a marshmallow. No, man, this was some real stuff, Albert said before a large smirk spread across his face. Word is, the church and the statue are still standing somewhere in the forest. He continued as he slowly sat up. I sighed and looked at him. Let me guess, you want to look for the place? I asked. He nodded vigorously as his smirk grew. Hell yeah, man. Think about it. We find this place, we'd be local legends. Plus, I've heard ivory sells for quite a pretty penny. He added, looking to the group. We all traded looks amongst each other before looking back at Albert. Alright, why not? We eventually all agreed. After all, it was just an urban legend. Besides, even if it was the real place, the place was abandoned. One built by a bunch of crazy cultists from over 100 years ago at that. It'd probably just be a rundown wood shack with some cross made of twigs on the roof. So after a brief bit of debating, we decided to begin making a hunt for this church. To be honest, we had no idea where we were going. We just started walking in one direction in hopes we'd come across it. And to be fair, this did lead us to a dirt path that looked to be man-made, in which we started walking. It was definitely a strange place to put a pathway, seeing as how we were in the middle of the woods. During about an hour of walking down this path, we were about ready to call it quits and head back to the campsite, until we spotted it. A small shrine at the end of the dirt path we quickly made our way to. No way. I mumbled in complete shock as I stared upon a small, run-down, red-painted church. This place looked like it belonged in Wonderland. Granted, Tim Burton's version. The building seemed warped and uneven, almost like some sort of optical illusion. The place didn't have any windows either. I mean, it did, but no glass in the framing, just black stone slabs. The door was huge and made from stainless steel with intricate engravings of curved lines, and in the center, a giant horned crow. This was real stainless, too. As the door shined in the dark like a glow stick, almost like it's been getting taken care of while the rest of the building was decrepit and left to rot. Well now, let's do this. Albert said as he pulled out a small Swiss Army knife and opened what looked like a lockpick. I'll be honest, the moment I saw this place, I was filled with the greatest sense of alarm I had ever felt in my life. Yet my sense of curiosity slightly outweighed it, enough to ignore the obvious setup to a horror movie that leads to everyone sliced up by some deranged masked killer or something. Breaking into a church? Does that count as a sin? Teddy asked as he leaned over Albert's shoulder to watch him work. Since when have you been religious? Albert responded as he inserted the pick into the key slot, in which the door began opening. Well, guess it wasn't even locked, he said with a satisfied smirk, opening the door all the way. The inside was what you'd expect to see in a normal church, rows of benches lining each side of the building, with an open aisle in the middle leading to a small stage. A preaching podium, and a large statue of some kind. Oh my god. Carmen let out in a burst of excitement as he fished out a flashlight from his pocket to shine it on the statue. The statue was made to resemble a horned crow similar to the one on the door. However, this statue was far more detailed, showing the creature had 7 eyes, 3 of each side of its face, and one resting on its open beak. The center of each eye had small red jewels embedded into them to give the effect of pupils. It also donned 4 wings that looked like feathered bat wings, and rather than the bottom half of a bird like a tail or talons, it had the lower body of a serpent. Deep carvings filled with what looked like emeralds to give the effect of scales. The horns were curled like a ram made of solid gold, and just like Albert had said, the whole thing seemed to be carved from smooth ivory. Cody, man, we're gonna be rich. Albert roared as he bumped my shoulder. I'll admit the idea was extremely tempting. We were looking at what looked to be at least 200 pounds of pure ivory, along with a small trove of jewels, all too easy for the taking. But my better half got the best of me. Yeah, where are we gonna put it? Besides, looting from a church just seems low. Are you really that desperate? I asked, trying to tame my greed. However, Albert was quick to be the devil on my shoulder. Come on, dude. Look at the thing. Even a chunk of that will set us up for years. We each take a quarter of this thing and sell it off. That's 50 pounds of pure ivory at least. He continued to pry. You can take one of the horns. Solid golden, my good friend. Right as I was about to give in, Teddy said something that gave me chills. Why is it so clean? He asked as he closely inspected the thing. We all looked at him for a moment, then to the statue. What do you mean? Carmen asked as he walked closer to inspect it. Well, look at this place. It's a complete mess. Yet this statue doesn't have a speck of dust on it. Hell, it looks like it's been polished too. Teddy continued as he extended his arm towards the rest of the room. That led me to think of something else. The door is spotless too. You think this place is still in use? I asked. The other 3 traded looks before Albert broke the silence. Well then, let's get this thing out if you're quick then, he said, quickly grabbing onto one of the statue's horn, only for his hand to get fried to a crisp. He reeled his hand back in pain as the smell of burnt flesh. Albert's palm looked like he'd just put his hand in a high blast furnace oven. But we could barely focus on it for long once Carmen started yelling. It's looking at us, he cried out as he stumbled onto his ass. I turned my head to the statue to see the eye in its beak had completely turned to face us. Then the other 6. Then they blinked, before the sound of cracking of ivory could be heard as the creature broke from its shell. The ivory shedded as if it was a second skin, slowly peeling off the beast as it extended its wings. It turned its head to us before swallowing its eye, soon after reappearing on the creature's forehead. As it looked towards me, with unnatural speed the beast slithered up to me, meeting me face to face. I should have probably screamed, or fought back, or run. Anything, but I was absolutely paralyzed in fear. The thing studied me as I trembled softly, trying not to look into the eyes. It looked like it was going to go for the kill when suddenly Carmen yelled out again in fear. What is that thing? He yelled out. It quickly locked his attention to him before shrieking out in a high-pitched, gargly cry and launching itself towards him. He tried to get up and run, but the thing was too fast, quickly wrapping itself around Carmen's body. The monster slowly began to squeeze before piercing its long beak through his chest. It looked like it was drinking his blood, like a mosquito as it slowly drained Carmen of all bodily fluids. It almost looked like he was shriveling up, as if the thing was drinking him like a juice box. Teddy tried to charge the thing, but it was obvious he wouldn't be able to do anything. as the beast quickly swatted him away with its massive wings. It sent him flying through the room, smashing through 2 of the benches and breaking his leg. I was expecting the creature to slaughter all of us, but it just stared over the remaining 3. It slowly extended its wings and took off through the large metal door. I ended up collapsing and blacking out due to fear and confusion. I think my mind just couldn't process what it had seen, causing my body to shut down just attempting to. I remember waking up at the campsite by the fire. At first, I felt a huge wave of relief as I quickly shot up and saw we were out. Relief that was quickly taken from Albert's words. "Wasn't a dream, man." I heard from the other side of the fire to see him clutching his hand and staring deep into the fire. "Teddy's in his tent, his legs completely screwed. The thing took Carmen," he continued as he slowly paid down. We ended up explaining it away as a camping trip gone wrong. Carmen went missing in the middle of the night. Teddy broke his leg on our search for him, and Albert burnt his hand while grilling. I mean, what were we gonna say? Anything even close to the truth would get us all locked away in a loony bin. So we tried to come up with something as believable as possible. After giving our stories, we brought Teddy to the hospital and Albert to get treated for his hand. It's been about 6 years since then. I don't go camping anymore. I haven't even lived near any woodland areas since. I still talk to Teddy every now and then, but Albert, he went missing about 2 years after. He said he was going to try to find the place again. I'm guessing he did. The thing still gives me nightmares. Every night I see the thing's eyes looking deep through me before lurching its spear-like beak into my chest. I don't know why it didn't kill the rest of us. I have absolutely no clue why Albert would go back to that place. And I have absolutely no clue why I'm so tempted to do so myself. I had sworn to myself that I would not tell anyone about what I experienced, but after finding all of you here, I feel that I can tell this story without everyone thinking I was drunk or high. I've been both, and my brain has never created something as scary as this. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia. It's a bit north of Vancouver. I actually work in Vancouver as a programmer for a big tech firm there. I'm not going to say who because I don't want this to get back to them. I already have a reputation for being unsteady thanks to some bad choices early in my life. I had finished a rather arduous project that took not only my entire team but for myself months to complete so that it became on schedule. We're talking 80-hour work weeks and on the verge of burnout for most of it. My boss had made it clear that when the project was over, I was to take 2 weeks and go home. When I had set out on a Friday morning, the sun had already started its descent, and I knew that I wouldn't get home until real late at night. It did not matter since my mom and dad were going to let me crash with them. My family has always been supportive of my rehabilitated life and career. They'd do anything to make sure that I succeeded. Honestly, I don't want to beat around the bush and tell you about my life. There is probably a subreddit for that. What I wanted to tell you about was the hitchhiker that I picked up on the road. I was 4 hours into a 7-hour drive up Interstate 99 and had just passed a sign marker for Tunnel Point when I saw her. If you don't know this area of Canada, Interstate 99 leaves Vancouver and winds its way along the coast of Horseshoe Bay. The entire winding road has the water out my left-hand window with the hills and thick northern forest to my right. When it comes to traffic, it's usually feast or famine. Right now, the 2-line highway was empty, and only blackness hugged the beams of my headlight. A bit of rain fell from the sky, pelting my window, but not enough to make me want to turn on my wipers. I was so tired that I worried that if I took my eyes off of the road, I would fall asleep. That's when I saw her. Well, I think it was her, 'cause it looked like a woman. She was on the far right side of the road. I could make out the movement of her skirt as she semi-walked and stumbled on the unpaved side of the road. Immediately I was worried because I had not seen a car broken down on my journey, and the way she was moving made me wonder if she had been hurt. The closest place was Tunnel Point that I had passed that a while ago. I glanced at my radio clock and saw the yellow numbers for midnight. Maybe it was the exhaustion, but my concern won out. Slowing my beat-up Honda, I glanced in my rearview mirror to make sure nobody was coming, and paced with the stumbling girl. What I could make out of the woman was that she had long hair and her clothes were tattered. Since being closer, I noted she swayed as if she was drunk. I rolled down my window and crinkled my nose at the smell of dead leaves coming from the forest nearby. The earthy scent clawing at my nose. God, I hated the forest. Hey, I called to her, trying to be friendly and not scary. I did not want her to think I was some sort of pervert that was going to have my way with her if she got into my car. I truly was worried for her safety. The girl stumbled a bit more but seemed to stop walking, head still facing down at the ground, matted hair stringy and wet. Poor thing looked like she might have drug herself out of water. Hey, you need a lift somewhere? The girl did not respond. She just stood there looking at the ground as if mesmerized by the stones. I could not make out much except her skin was pale. You okay? I tried again, deciding that if she did not respond this time, I was absolved of my good Samaritan duties. Finally giving up, I began to roll up the window when she reached up and placed her hand on the moving glass. I quickly stopped before getting her hand crushed. I want to go home. Her words came in a mixture of wet coughing. Where's home? I asked. All she did was raise her hand and point forward. I noticed her hands were stained with soil and her nails, once painted, were cracked. Get in. I'll take you home. I said, ignoring the clawing feeling in my stomach. Since stopping the car, I had found myself looking about as if something was trying to sneak up on me. Of course, nothing was there. The hairs on my arms had begun to tingle, and the urge to get out of there overwhelmed me. The girl fumbled with the door a few times before she was finally able to open it. The door creaked agonizingly slow as she pulled it open. Finally, she pulled her tattered form into the car and sat in the seat. I finally got a good look at her, and my heart sunk. She was a petite girl. I would not call her beautiful, but she had a nice face and a decent figure. She wore a white shirt stained mostly brown and green for both mud and grass. The smell of rotting vegetation had followed her into the car. Her brown hair was long but tangled into thick, crazy knots filled with bramble, weeds, and mud. I could barely make out her eyes, but they were brown and vacant. Thin lines of grass stain streaked across her face, with red welts around them, almost as if someone had struck her in the face with a bush. There were scars on her hands, arms, and parts of her legs I could see through the torn skirts. I should have kicked her out. I should have never picked her up. At that moment, I knew that, but it was already too late. How could I kick out someone who obviously looked like they were in trouble? Where would you like to go? I asked, searching her clothing, and saw it. A flimsy red plastic name tag where the name was almost faded out. Bethany? Where would you like to go, Bethany? Home, was all she coughed out. I saw a bit of dirt and saliva fall into her lap, then quickly looked ahead and started the car moving again. For the next 10 minutes, I drove, trying my hardest not to look at the corpse-like woman sitting beside me. Like a fool. I did try a bit of small talk to get some more information out of her, but she did not respond. I was thinking so much about what I was doing, and how I got myself into this situation. I actually forgot that she was in the car beside me. The things that a lack of sleep will make you do. It was when I felt her wet hands on my shoulder, soaking through my blue button-up as if she was underwater. I jumped and spun to look at her. Those eyes were focused on me. They were brown like I had surmised, but I could have sworn they were glassy and empty like a fake eye. Either mud or blood had streaked down out of her nostril, and she had a tight grip on my shoulder. "Up there," she coughed out, and I saw this Bethany was pointing out the window. I saw it. It was a dirt road turning off the main highway into the forest. I did tell you I hated the forest. I did not want to turn. I tried to say something about dropping her off, but the vice-like grip on my shoulder had begun to ache. "Take me home," she gurgled again. It was at this point that I began to think to myself that what I was dealing with might not actually be human. Slowing my vehicle and turning onto the dirt road, I was glad that I was buckled as the car rocked back and forth on a road that had not been maintained in years. The forest around felt claustrophobic, as the smell of wet leaves and decay permeated my car. I wanted to roll down the window, but my panicking brain told me that something would get in if I did. Even the moon struggled to push through the canopy of foliage overhead. I realized that I had entered a clearing when the roof erupted in a thunderous sound. It took me a split second to realize that it had begun to rain heavily. The moon was now in full force, illuminating the path ahead. My heart dropped as I saw it. We were in the middle of nowhere in the Canadian wilderness, and standing in the middle of this field were 5 massive stone pillars reaching up towards the heavens. They had to be at least 3 stories, having a thick base that tapered smaller towards the top. This place was not centered in the clearing, but the last few pillars were placed against an ancient-looking forest that felt older than it should have been. As my car reached the end of the dirt road, and for a brief moment I thought I would be out of here, my car died. It didn't sputter, it didn't choke, it just turned off. It rolled a few feet to a stop, perfectly at the end of the road. The thing with the name tag, Bethany, fumbled for the door a few times before successfully opening it. She fell out onto all 4 before slowly and painfully pulling herself up. I was doing my hardest not to panic, but I could feel the tightness in my chest and the suffocating stench clawing at my lungs. I did not want to leave that car, but the smell would have killed me if I didn't. Throwing open the door and falling out myself, I breathed in the clean, wet air and ignored the rain pelting me. Pulling myself up by the warm hood of my car, I decided to look around and found that Bethany had meandered like a zombie into the middle of these tall pillars. It did not appear she had any rhythm or reason to be in there. She just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking ahead in the dark forest and the last 2 pillars. Now this is the part where I was stupid. I could have just abandoned my car and made a run for it, but curiosity got the best of me. You know that feeling where you think you are safe because nothing is paying attention to you? Yeah, well, I fell for that trap. I crept forward to keep a low profile, looking between the closest pillar and Bethany, who still had not moved. I closed the distance pretty easily and crouched behind the rough-hewn stone. I glanced down and noticed strange carvings that looked almost like symbols. When I looked back up, Bethany was no longer alone. Standing in the grove with her were about 6 new people, all women, and they looked in the same state as the girl I had brought here. They had formed a semicircle with Bethany at the front of it. It was at that point I realized that they were also not alone. I could not make them out, and I thank God every day, but a group of things had appeared between the pillars. They were unnatural, standing at least 7 feet tall with arms that were stretched down to the ground, their arms jointed in unnatural ways. They seemed to be wearing heavy sailors' outfits, but it was torn and decaying. Their faces were covered in cloth, but I had a sense that whatever was underneath was moving about. I stifled a scream and covered my mouth when I looked to my right and saw the clawed foot of one of those things by me. That foot. God. It had 6 toes, but these were not any ordinary toes. They were made out of human fingers. I wanted to run away so bad, but I knew that it would see me. so I stayed hunched down, looking at the gathering. It was then I noticed they had something new. I did not see how it happened, but now in the clearing were a man and a woman. They were not like the others, but struggling against bindings that had their hands tied behind their backs. The rain was still coming down, but the moon illuminated the absolute terror in their faces. Both of them were naked, their legs and feet stained by the mud and grass from around. They had been forced to their knees facing the forest. I felt something tremor through the ground and both became still, mostly in abject terror as I had done. A pressure began to build up in my head as if something was trying to escape, and I clasped at it still, unable to pull my eyes away from what I was watching. Something in the forest was speaking. I don't know how I knew, but the language was ancient, forbidden, words that defied understanding, but I could somehow instinctively understand that it was saying at the same time. Now the words have failed like a bad dream, but I had the foresight to write it down at the end, as you'll find out. Here's what it felt like it was being said. Who comes to the ancient door to the chaos cold? We, the servants of Dyack. The woman, including Bethany, chanted back in the same tongue. Do the blessed seek favor or vice? The rumbling said again. We seek nothing but the glory of Dyack, came the response. Only through turning of time, of no sun shall the glory be attained. Death to the light and those who support it, O Deck. Bring the feast for those who collect loyalty, the thing intoned. What I saw next was something that I can only describe, but still does not do it any justice. The ground seemed to be alive as roots of a tree burst from the ground and snaked their way to the naked man, who began to scream. His screams were muffled, as it seemed dirt was packed tightly into his mouth. The roots snaked up his body, fastening themselves tightly on his limbs. I didn't know what was going on until his screaming got louder, and the sound of cracking and tearing echoed through the chamber. As if like a paper doll, the man's limbs were slowly pulled one by one from his torso and were flung into the darkness where those tall creatures waited, greedily snapping up, and from the sound, I could only guess were feeding. The man was still alive and had gone into shock as the vines carried the remains into the dark forest from which the sound was coming. When the blood-stained vines returned, they were empty. The woman had stopped screaming and had been silently weeping. I could only guess she had given up, knowing what her fate was going to be. As I would find out, if her fate was the same as the man's, it would have been a mercy. The vines had returned and began to wrap them around her feet and arm, slowly raising her above the ground like the man and holding her over the unholy congregation. The voice thrummed again through the landscape. The epoch of night will return. Dyack. The time of decay will find the land once more. And then the end came for the naked girl. I'm not going to describe it because you all don't need to have the same memory in your head, but all I'm going to say is that the branches sought out every orifice and forced their way into her body. Her eyes proved to be the most resistant, but from the sounds and what I could see, she had been impaled like some grotesque puppet wailing from the dirt. Holes were pierced as everything in the way was moved, and her blood began to trickle down on the woman who had turned their head upwards. The last thing I saw before the pressure knocked me out was many vines exiting their upturned mouths, reaching to the sky and the feast above, and something massive in the forest beginning to lift up. When I reawoke, my first thought was that I was next on the menu, but the bright sun beat down on me, and my car idled quietly on the path. Instead of stone pillars, I was at the base of a large tree. They were in the same position, but it did not look like the scene from earlier. I dragged my soaked body to the car and somehow made it to my parents. They were shocked to see me in the condition I was in, but did not tell them anything. I slept for 3 days, and they had called a doctor. I had nightmares of the voice, and when I woke, I found that I had written the conversation of that horrific night in one of my comic books from my childhood. It's been about a week now, and I still have not gone back to Vancouver. It's not that I don't want to work there, but that stretch of road now terrifies me. I worry that if I go down that path again, I would be the next meal for whatever is living in the Canadian forest. So, that's it. I got nothing else to say. I'm going to post this and hopefully get back to work tomorrow. My dad is going to drive me back to my apartment. Then, I won't be visiting for quite a long time. I don't know if this adds any essence whatsoever to this entire story, but about a month ago, I read a story with a very weird theme. Knowledge is painful, ignorance is bliss. For context, it's 8 a.m. right now and I'm a stupid sophomore in high school, and I might have made the worst mistake of my entire life. My friend Abraham invited me over to his house just a day ago for a sleepover. He's an overnight senior and is almost always smoking weed. I came over and we shared a blunt before playing some video games on his old Xbox 360. We always do random stuff and find the weirdest ways to entertain ourselves. It was getting late and we were tired. 12:30ish. He nudged my shoulder and began talking to me about this weird drug. There was some sketchy as hell dude on the side of the road handing out some drug called Wonderland. He told me about it, and it sounded like a fun as hell experience. If we do some weird stuff in our sleep, I can record it. How sketchy are we talking? Mad sketchy, dude. He had this really thin beard on his face and looked like he was tripping balls. Hands couldn't even hold still, and his eyes were almost completely gray. Kept talking about how this drug would bring my dreams to life and how I would do some crazy stuff in my sleep. So I got two and you to try it. Dirt cheap. Literally cost me $2.50 for both. Man, there's no way I'm trying that. Sounds like a trip to the hospital, and I don't want to spend another year under drug watch. Come on, dude, give it a shot. I'll even tell your parents that I force you if things go crazy and stuff. Abraham put his phone in the corner and began recording a time lapse. He then passed the drug over to me and gestured me to pop it in my mouth. It was squishy and didn't even come in a container. That or Abraham had already opened it for me. It was dark gray and felt like Play-Doh. Abraham had stuck his into his mouth, so I did the same. It tasted salty. Really salty. Man, what is this stuff? I swallowed quickly and grabbed some water. I should have just spit it out. Dude, this is literally that dough stuff they sell to kids. I thought it was legit. Screw that old guy, I'm gonna beat his ass. Damn, I hope so, because if this starts making me trip out and have a seizure on the floor, I'm gonna beat your ass. Yeah, whatever, dude, try me. I'm hitting the sack now. I want to see if this is legit. He just waved me off and laid on the couch. I could take you, just watch me. He just ignored me and pretended to be asleep. After this, I felt nothing. Whatever this Wonderland drug was, I thought it was just a piece of Play-Doh like him. I stayed awake for a little while longer and just played on the Xbox. I launched the demo of Peggle that was on it and messed around in the few levels available, checking back on Abraham to see if maybe something had actually happened. He just continued to breathe and occasionally snort, followed by a few seconds of snoring each time. Eventually I joined him and laid on the armchair. I fell asleep and woke up a few hours later. The TV had a weird hint of static, but had the Xbox 360 home screen on. I looked over at Abraham, who was still asleep, and went to go get some water. The time said 3:20 a.m. I got a glass of tap water and went back to the room, disconnecting the Xbox because of a weird noise it was making. I shot awake in a cold sweat. My heart was racing and I had an extreme headache, but nothing had even happened. The TV was on and so was the Xbox, reading 3:28 a.m. I looked at Abraham, who I had thought maybe woke up, and turned it on, then went back to sleep. I thought nothing of it and went back to the armchair, but for some reason I couldn't sleep. I stared up into space and let my mind wander, thinking back on the drug. Whatever it was seemed to be fake. Abraham sat up and began laughing hysterically. He stared at the TV while he did it. I looked over with him and saw something in the screen only for a split second. It was a red figure. It was suddenly quiet and the TV was off again. Abraham was also asleep. The radio clock on the other side of the room read 4:30 a.m. I was breathing heavily and panicking. I went over to Abraham to wake him, but I couldn't. He just laid there with his eyes wide open. I kept on shaking him and even began to cry, but he just held still. I was in that chair again. Out of nowhere, I have no idea why, I was just there again. The TV was on and the Xbox screen was visible, but blood red. Blood red and playing this horrific sound of screams and what sounded like someone talking. The windows were being slammed and blood stained them. Inhuman bony hands ran along the windows and smeared the blood all over in weird lumps. The clock read 5:14 a.m., and Abraham wasn't on the couch. He was on the floor rolling around and screaming and laughing. I ran towards the door and reached for the knob. I wanted to get the hell out of there. I was in the chair again. The clock read 6:30 and the sun was shining through. The radio clock was blasting a weird song as an alarm. Abraham was on the couch, kicking the ends. The TV was on, and the Xbox screen looked normal. There was nothing in the windows. I ran over to him and shook him awake. He screamed and his eyes were bloodshot. He punched me in the face and threw me to the floor. "Wait, it's me, man. It's me." I yelled at him, assuring he experienced the same thing. "What are you doing?" "Put two and two together. It's that drug you made us take." "Holy shit. So sorry, dude." "So much for a wonderland. I almost died." He stared into space with his eyes darting around. My phone. He ran to his cell phone and looked at it. The thing was still recording. I saw him stop the video and immediately go to play it back. He began scrolling quickly through the video. Everything I did was mirrored perfectly. The water I drank, turning off the Xbox, running for my life. But every time I would walk back to the chair and lay motionless again. Abraham was laughing at 3:30. The same time in the dream. He was rolling around at 5:14. The Xbox turned itself on, and I kept turning it off. In between, I did stuff I couldn't remember. Abraham was pointing it out to me, saying he saw me do the exact same things in whatever trance state we were in. We kept playing it back, and for one frame, a split second at 5:14 a.m., a figure appeared. "Turn it back, dude. Turn it back," I yelled at him. He did. He rewound it a few seconds and caught the exact frame where the figure appeared. It was dark red and featureless, bearing only a slight resemblance to a human. It was wavy and covered in blobs, and it appeared to have only one white eye. It stood in the corner of the room staring at us. Finally, I put it together. The drug brought out the missing parts of our dreams. Whatever twisted stuff goes on in our heads at night was brought out during those moments. But that wasn't all. Whatever that figure is, it brought that out too. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think it was ever meant to be free. I wish this wasn't real. I wish I never knew. I'm at home now and I'm going to call the police to find whoever the hell that drug guy was. And maybe whatever that thing was. I can't begin to tell you how many times I sat here, typing everything out only to press backspace until I was staring at a blank screen once again. I wasn't even sure if I should place this onto here. The internet has a funny way of connecting people like that after all. Letting them find things, yet I wasn't sure where else to go. How many paper trails I can make of this before they're all gone. Where do I begin? How do I begin? Well, I suppose we should start with the title, the topic, the reason for why you are here. I think my husband is a cannibal. Perhaps serial killer would be the better term, more accurate. Perhaps I shouldn't even use the word think, and it's more of a no. And you're probably scrolling through this wondering why I haven't left yet. How I didn't know. Welcome to the club on that one. I always thought that I was good at reading people after being bitten one too many times. I'd even spent the last 15 years of my life with him. I could tell you what every micro expression on his face meant as if I was an archaeologist examining his bones. I could read his eyes, his posture, the very gait in his walk. I knew the little things and the big things, the reasons for it all. If the world was ending, I could find him in the aftermath by just his very atoms. I could find him at the beginning, too. Just as he could read me, knew me. We might as well have spent the beginning of our star-dusted time together. Yet I could not begin to tell you how I didn't know this, how I didn't see what Sam was. We were high school acquaintances turned friends when we left for different colleges, reconnected through the same goal. The goal being the Necromantian Ranch, located in northwestern Wyoming. Over 15,000 acres filled with mountains and valleys and open plains, with history old and new carved out into the land. The original owners had used it for cattle and horses, and had kept their family there since 1885. I wasn't sure why they were selling, but both Sam and I were tired of living in Boston. We wanted the country life, a revert back, a fresh start, and through our shared finances we were able to do it. Sam had inherited a rather large amount from his family over the years from what he had told me. And I, well, made money with my degree, aggressively saving every penny until I was sure that I would die having saved everything and spent nothing. The ranch had merely been an opportunity for the both of us to have our own place, far, far away from Western civilization. A place where it wouldn't matter what degrees was held or what positions we carried. I had grown up on a farm after all, if memory serves correct, as had Sam. Boston had been an imperfection within our current state, and the ranch was perfect. The ranch hands who stayed on with us called it Dawn Creek Ranch due to the sun rising over the creek bed that separated the open front yard of the home to the woods and mountains. The home that sat on it was even surprisingly modern, and didn't take too many renovations, though I left that for Sam to deal with. The closest neighbors nearby didn't even seem to mind that we were new owners coming in. Everything fell into an odd place as if fate was pulling the strings. The beginning harvest yielded nearly without consequences. The livestock flourished with little death. We spent an entire year here in peace before the first incident. I call it an incident solely for the factor that the investigation was closed rather swiftly. The detective had come onto the property and didn't return again after the first round of questioning. I say the first because it was never really followed up on. The weeks I had spent waiting to see his car pull up again had never come, and it was all due to the issue at hand. The incident. It had been the first time that a ranch hand had gone missing. Tucker Abbott had been one of the ones that we had hired on, a drifter, my husband had called him, though seasonal employee would have been the better phrasing. He was a young 20-something who told us that he spent his summers down in Arizona and Nevada. Instagram proved that he wasn't trying to con us, and his work certainly showed the skill. Though he was known for staying out late at times, drifting off for a walk in the woods or going into town for the nearest bar. When he didn't show up that morning at the barn gates, we assumed he had gone into town and stayed out too late. When one of the hands mentioned him going off into the woods on one of our paths, we assumed he merely got turned around. We searched for him for hours until the sun finally set. Then, when his belongings disappeared the next morning, everyone assumed that he had decided to leave, off on his way to another ranch. The season was ending after all, though as the one handling the finances for the ranch hands, I didn't understand at the time why a nomad would forget their last envelope of cash, though I was quickly reassured that it meant nothing. Even when a detective showed up, perhaps I should have pushed it when, later that same day, my husband had offered me dinners of meat that I had not prepared. Finances aside, Sam couldn't kill an animal for food if he tried. I had been the butcher on the ranch. Any meat not done by hand came from the supermarket in the nearest town. Only I could tell by looking at the raw meat sitting on the counter that it wasn't made in some factory and bought. No one had left the ranch either. "Did a hand do that for you?" I can recall asking. And Sam had merely grinned at me, shaking his head as if I had told him that the sun was out when it was raining. "I did this one," he stated, turning back around to prepare the dinner. I didn't eat that night, or any night he cooked after that until the meat was gone. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe I subconsciously knew something was wrong, because, butchering aside, Sam was the better cook and I never turned down a meal from him. There was just this pit that formed in me at that moment I saw it. A hollow weight pushing down within my throat, against my heart. Nothing changed outside of that, though. Not even when that same detective came to investigate once again. Not even when the other hands started to disappear one by one. This is probably where you're going, seriously? And there's no way all of this could be happening and she never once questioned him. Well, you're partially right. I did question him. Or more specifically, him over the hands. Only he brought it all down to them leaving due to seasonal work, or because the others were leaving and they didn't want to work. And I couldn't necessarily argue back. The livestock thrived, the harvest yielded. Winter came brutal with a mother's hate, and spring came with a warm hand against the land. It got to the point where I was wondering why we even needed the hands at all to begin with. I had gotten used to the extra work, felt myself come to life with spring around me once again. I never even thought of Tucker Abbott until this past week when I walked in for dinner and found that same kind of meat sitting on the counter. "I didn't butcher that," I remarked, pausing in my path to the kitchen. Sam merely tisked at me, holding up a box of taco shell packets that we had gotten from the store a while back. "I hope you're hungry this time. I know how you like your tacos." "I know that you've been avoiding the meat," goes on said. I could see it in his eyes, though. I watched it in the trace of his veins as he held the skillet and began to break the grounded meat apart. I didn't want to say anything, though. Part of me even considered the fact that I was possibly going crazy. Surely Sam knew how to butcher the animals. I hadn't done any in a while, and I certainly wasn't keeping track of any missing heads. He easily could have done this in my sleep, and I was letting my head get the best of me, even if Sam had never so much as killed a bug in all of the years I had known him. "Sure thing." I had taken my seat then. These past few months have just been off for me. Sam hummed at that, continuing to cook, and we shared silence until he was done. The night then fell into routine. He made our plates, sat down before me, before taking his seat. We didn't say grace or anything, merely waiting for the other to dig in what could only be described as one waiting for the other to bite into a kill. I had finally gone first and kicked myself for overthinking the first time. The meat was delicious. Not cow or chicken, or the usual deer. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, though, as I let it sit in my mouth before swallowing. It's not turkey, is it? Does it taste like turkey? Sam mused back, stabbing his fork into the small side salad that he had made for us. Well, no. I just can't narrow it down. We can make it into a game. It wasn't a question either, causing me to frown. Our games were normally board games or chess, or ones filled with the forest floor and grounds of the open plains beneath my feet. Mind games were not ones that we usually played on one another, if you could even call this a mind game. But at the time, I had considered it. A guessing game? I asked, taking another bite. It was so easy to watch the juices from the meat run down my fingers, staining my hands. What other game would it be, Amelia? Come on, like I Spy that we used to play on road trips, or Where's Waldo? Waldo? I'd almost smarted back then that he didn't even know what the game even meant until I began to look around. Kitchen decor had been his thing. I never once paid attention to our shelves, but I recognized the items. A cowboy hat here, a lasso there, a silver pant chain, the worn leather of a wallet devoid of contents, a compass, a pocket knife, things that looked abandoned as if placed there when coming in. The only thing that stood out from it was a silver watch that was far too businesslike for either of us, and far too expensive for anyone that had worked for us. Is that your watch? Close, but not quite. Certainly not mine. Besides, when did we start leaving things like those in the kitchen? Sam merely took another bite, chewing slowly as he watched me before he stopped. His jaw tightened. Have I ever told you how intelligent you are? Not recently, no. You've seen the watch before. Think on it, was all that he said. The rest of dinner was quiet, uneventful outside of the talk of the weather and nearby cow prices. I hadn't even thought of our game that ended before it could begin until I found myself going down into the kitchen at 2 a.m. I couldn't tell you why I did it. I couldn't tell you what brought me down there, but I couldn't get the taste out of my mouth. No matter how many times I gazed into my own eyes, brushing my mouth out until blood fell, the leftover meat sat in a dish in the fridge, covered in clear plastic wrap to keep it fresh. I had grabbed it without even standing there to think what it was that I wanted. Then I had gone outside, sat in the grass until the cold earth sunk into my skin, watching the juices of the meat stain my fingers and drip down my arms. Taco shells long forgotten in the cabinet. One bite after the next. I was sure that Sam was going to find me shoveling the meat helplessly into my mouth, gorging myself. Only he hadn't come. Never even noticed I was gone. The next day he didn't even question the missing meat. He merely prepared more, as if he had been saving up for the very occasion that I had finally decided to eat his new meals with new meat. And it wasn't until 2 days ago when I realized that I did remember where the watch had come from. The detective had worn a watch just like it, the only model that I had ever seen. It didn't take long for my mind to connect after that. One night after another as I ate the remains and sunk within the earth. I think my husband is a cannibal, a serial killer, maybe even something else entirely. Something far older than one whose name is Sam. But that means that I am too, and well, I've always been the butcher. So I ask you, now that I've laid it all out, what should I do about this? No, I did not suddenly fall prey to insomnia. In fact, my family always jokes about how I would probably sleep through an airstrike as well. And I never denied the fact until 45 days ago. My family has lived in an old Victorian-style house for as long as I can remember, or for as long as our family album has the photos to show. My son is about to be born in this house. I was born in this house. So was my father, and so was my grandfather. My great-grandpa Phil had built this house, and it had been in this family ever since. We are pretty close-knit with each other, so my parents, my brother, and his family, and my wife and I live in the same house. Everyone gets along well with each other. We have a decent, semi-famous, family-owned food and beverages business in the city, and there aren't any clashes regarding the property or the will. Everyone was given what they had wished for, so no issues there. All in all, a pretty ordinary life that I have led so far. I say so far because I haven't gone through anything like this in my life, ever. It all started 45 days ago. I had sent my wife off to her folks a few weeks prior to that to get her mind off of the pregnancy blues. Perhaps a little change in the scenery would do her good. I missed my little bird, but her mental health was more important to me than wanting a selfish hug at the end of a long day at work. That night, as per ritual, I talked to her over FaceTime for about an hour. She seemed pretty jolly, and even cracked jokes like the way she used to when we were in our dating phase. Seeing her like that made me happy and content. Then we said goodnight to each other and went to sleep. I am one of those people who cannot sleep without a thin blanket to cover myself with. I even cover my face when I am sleeping. Thank God for that peculiar habit. I woke up to an unusual sound at 2 a.m. I know this because the grandfather clock in the corridor of my floor chimed so. It sounded like a gargle mixed with roar. I don't know. I can't really put it into words, so please make do with that description. I wondered if it was my tummy, luring me to get up and get it a late night snack. I had faced embarrassing situations in school and university where my tummy would rumble in the quietest of moments, causing heads to turn in my direction. So something like that happening now wouldn't be new, but not wanting to get out of bed, I turned to face the other side. That's when I heard it again. This time, I was sure it wasn't my tummy. The sound was more guttural, more malicious. The sheet that I use to cover myself while sleeping is a very regular, pure white, translucent piece of cloth, so thankfully I didn't need to remove the cover from my face to figure out what made the sound. I opened my eyes, and even in the pitch darkness of the room, I could sense a presence in the room. Not just in the room, but rather mere inches away from me. Whoever, or whatever it was well within reach to kill me if it wanted to. As my eyes got adjusted to the darkness of the room through my cover, I could see a faint, eerie glow emanating from the entity. It was like an outline, though, not strong enough to light anything up, so the room remained dark as it was. I could feel sweat trickling from my forehead. I wanted to scream, but I wondered if it'd be a wise choice. Not that I could scream anyway. My voice was stuck in my throat. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. The next day, I thought of talking to my wife about it, but I decided otherwise. I didn't want to bother her. So I told everything to my brother. He was concerned, yes, but only because he thought I was a victim of a terrible nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't sleep paralysis or a night terror either. Why would it be? I didn't have anything traumatic in my life to trigger anything of the sorts. Also because the presence was back again the next night, and it has been back every night since then. I don't know when it comes, but I feel its presence every night at 2 a.m. I have managed to make out some of its features from inside the safety of my sheet. Well, not some. Just its abnormally big red glowing eyes. It doesn't do anything. It just stands inches away from me, towering over my cowering body, its glowing glare piercing through my sheet. I am a grown-ass man. I have about 50-odd people working under me. I am weeks away from welcoming my baby. But every single night, I am scared shitless. I know it knows that I am aware of its presence, but I don't open my eyes. I don't throw away my sheet even though I am wide awake. I can't sleep either because I'm scared. Scared that the minute I move or the minute I fall asleep, it's going to pounce on my useless mass of a body. Scared that my baby will grow up fatherless. I haven't talked to my wife lately. I don't want her to see me. I look close to a zombie. My parents are worried. My brother keeps trying to crack jokes to make me feel better. My nieces try to get me to play with them, but nothing helps. Because I know what awaits me at night. Every time I close my eyes, I picture those glowing red eyes staring into my eyes. Just the thought of it sends chills down my spine. I don't know for how long I can maintain whatever little sanity I have left in me. If there's anyone who has had a similar experience with this entity, please let me know. I want to sleep. I want to be able to talk to my wife. I want to hold my son. Please help me. Update. I came back home last evening to my wife sitting on the couch, talking to my mom. She was playfully complaining about how I had forgotten her and was probably reliving my days as a bachelor. She had every right to complain, but her complaints soon changed into concern when she saw me standing halfway across the living room. She pestered me to tell her what's wrong. I made shit up about work being a bit hectic. I was happy to see my lovely wife, but fear soon crept in as I realized what might happen once we retire for the night. I asked her, almost annoyed as to why she came back, and she said she missed me because I hadn't talked to her for over 2 weeks. The slight rise in my tone had triggered her pregnancy emotions. I could see tears pooling in her eyes. I hugged her, and to my zombified self, that hug felt like heaven. Throughout evening, I did a mental countdown. I was scared to let my wife into my room. I even suggested her to take the guest room so that she could have the whole bed to herself. Weak excuse, I know, but she wanted to sleep in my safe arms. Safe, yeah, right. At bedtime, my wife snuggled up next to me and drifted off to sleep like a baby. Having her next to me was both a relief and a trigger to my impending fear. I closed my eyes, trying to catch some sleep if possible. Like clockwork, I woke up to the gargle roar of the entity, but this time there was something else as well. I heard my wife whimpering. That was enough for me to come out of my castle of cowardice. I threw off my sheet to see what was wrong. My wife was like a log, but she was hyperventilating. Between vehement sobs, she managed to mouth some words. "Babe, you see it too, right? Tell me it's a dream." My immediate reaction was very selfish. I was kind of relieved that the whole ordeal that I was going through was not a prolonged nightmare after all. My wife could see the entity as well. Then reality hit me like a truck. My wife could see the entity as well. Both of us were freaking out. I tried to think straight between my wife's sobs and the entity's silent roars. That's when I saw the entity for the first time. I don't know what I was expecting, but this thing, it was close to 7 feet, with those glowing red eyes I had always seen from inside my cover, and gangly arms. But this time it was standing next to me. It had shifted its position and was towering over my wife instead. It had its slender arms placed on my wife's very pregnant belly. It was caressing her belly as if it was a pet or something. Its glowing eyes were still directed at me, though. It kept staring at me for what felt like hours, but might as well have been mere seconds. It seemed as though I was in a trance, but that was broken by my wife's blood-curdling screams. I looked at her. Her face was twisted in an expression of pure pain and horror. And then I saw it. The entity's hands were no longer caressing her belly. They were now inside her, as if it wasn't human skin, flesh, and bones, rather water that they had penetrated. My wife looked at me, her eyes begging me to help, but I did nothing. I kept staring to and from her belly and the entity, hoping for help myself. And then it yanked my baby out. My beautiful baby boy was now in the arms of this creature, and I could do nothing. I could do nothing except stare at horror while my wife lay in a pool of blood, crying the most dreadful cries I have ever heard. By the time my family came up to my room, it was too late. The entity was gone, and so was our baby. All that was left was a grisly scar on my wife's belly, and bloody footprints from our bed to one of the walls.